Let's see, the first thing is you'll notice if you haven't been here before, you will enter muted. Please remain muted. Zoom, as many of you know, has a function where you can click on the participants icon on the bottom of your screen. It will give you a list of participants, and down at the bottom it says raise hand. If you click on that, the eyes get to see your blue hand and know you wish to speak. On pretty much every item on the agenda, we'll hear a report or a presentation, then the board will ask questions, and then I'll call on the public to ask questions. And at the end of the meeting, we have the last item is for public comments on any non-agenda item. So if there's something on our agenda that you, not on our agenda you want to talk about, that's the place to talk about it. If it's, we go through the agenda first and then we do that. I do have a couple of changes to the agenda. They're not significant, but the first one is I moved the fiscal report up ahead of the administrative report so that Dr. Rucker could go home, not have to sit through the entire meeting or hours of presentations that when he may not have to. And I also shifted the PreK partners report to the top of the committee reports. For Mariah Carney, I told her she would be early in the meeting last time and she wasn't, so I'm moving that up to the beginning. And we received reports for October from several of our PreK partners. If the board has questions, we can ask that of Mariah today, although I want to draw to everyone's attention that on November 18th, we'll be having a really comprehensive presentation about our PreK partners, about 166, about preschool in general, and sort of a primer for the board and the whole area of preschool. So those are the changes to the agenda. So I will go on to, we did have some communications. I believe they will be addressed in the administrative report. So we don't need to deal with that separately. So we would start with, if Frank would, this is a fiscal report on the changes in the reimbursement from COVID and hopefully additional reimbursements we're going to be getting, and then probably another primer on understanding the budget. So welcome, Frank. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And David, if I could do the share screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Give me a second.
That'd be great.
There you go.
All righty. So let's start with the status here of our the COVID funding that's available to us and where we're at so far. I did put this on the website. Barb put it on today. Let's see. We gotta make it a little smaller. There we go. Okay. So what you're looking at here is sort of the year to date, and I'll give you, as David asked, you know, sort of the update on what the legislature just did. But we've got information here. Probably the most relevant is this far right column, where we show by school district the largest group of funding available to public schools in Vermont is what's called this CRF LEA grant. Okay, so that's CARES Relief funding, and they designate this group as LEA. So over here on the far right, you see for that that category of funding, we've got just about $500,000. Either we cut checks or we've encumbered money, and then we have this for the whole supervisory union. There's the Vernon piece. And then for the supervisory union, I left this in here as well, just because most of this, 200,000, is really attributed to all of the schools, and it's primarily the PPE that was purchased through one one budget entity. So in total for what's called the CRF LEA, 765,000 has been either spent or we have purchase orders in the mix. And then when we keep moving through the different funding sources, and this is another one I'll give you the quick update on from the legislative changes. The ventilation work that has been ongoing, really, we got started in this in February with the controls contractor consolidating the servers and information that's available, along with control systems to all of our school facility managers. And now we are just placed a couple of pretty large orders based on the recent approval of additional funding. So another $562,000 for the Windham Southeast School District. Then when we kind of put it all together here at the bottom, so far, 1.3 million that is, it's in service for our, our schools, our kids, our teachers, and so on. So, David, you were asking how does this reflect what's available, and the legislature did make a substantial increase in the July-August legislative session. They essentially doubled the amount of money available under this LEA grant. They collected information from all school districts in Vermont with the intent of forecasting total need. The legislature appropriated $80 million based on what was projected as total need. So, the good news for us is this is all expected to be 100% refunded through the grant program. The grant requires the general federal procurement requirements, so we're being very careful about how we document the purchasing. We're expecting to see these grant agreements from the Agency of Ed any day now, and as soon as we get those grant agreements, we will start submitting applications for reimbursement as we spend the money. So that's the LEA I mentioned, 80 million. In addition, and for us, that's statewide. For us, we're projecting a little over $1 million in spending, and this is through December 30th this year. The ventilation grant, again, it was doubled. We kind of held up on a lot of the larger orders until we got the notification that things were funded. And so this is where in Academy, we basically doubled the number of unit ventilators that are going to be replaced. There'll be 11 units. And in Guilford was the other school where both the Guilford and the Academy schools had the really older era unit ventilators in the classrooms, 1950s, 1960s. They were running okay, but the specifications didn't meet the recommended ASHRAE standards, and these improvements will get us there. And fortunately, orders have been confirmed. Product is being manufactured, and we expect these things to be installed before the December grant period end. And again, that grant statewide went from $6.5 million to 13 million. And we have been right front in line asking for support. The ESSER money is what you heard a little bit about early in the process. This was the money that has both a longer timeline. It goes through, I believe, September of 22. And it has this component where we can identify budgeted items that what the state has called repurposed. And the significance of that is that it's money that's in our budget, but it's money to be spent for a different reason than what it was appropriated for. That's the money that the state basically reduces our education fund payment in the amount of what we apply. So there's no direct benefit to the school district specifically, but it helps the state overall essentially utilize the federal CARES Act money to help offset the ed fund deficit. So I would expect to see a lot more activity there in January and forward, but we of course are trying to do everything we can to get orders in and services purchasing completed before December for the majority of the funding that's been made available. Also on the website, I won't go through the detail, but if you did want to see a little more detail, what these financial reports just identify the different types of categories of how the money was spent. You know, as you know, most of it is supplies and equipment. There is a little bit of personnel, you know, in terms of as far as a portion of the total spending, but it does include things like our COVID coordinator and some of the planning expenses that were, you know, dedicated, particularly in the summer, to be ready to open and operate school. So those are all the details that support this summary spreadsheet. I was also going to address your request, David, on the, as we start looking forward to the budget process. You had mentioned bond amortization. You know, how does our debt work? It's absolutely an important part of our budget development. So I was prepared to talk briefly about that, but maybe before I did, were there any questions on the CARES relief funding and where we are on that?
There, I see Tim's hand up. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. I'm just curious. I didn't look at detail in the budget, but why is Oak Grove expenses for CRF LEAs so much higher than the other schools, other elementary schools?
Now that has to do with the amount of inventory that was available, and who in that case Oak Grove was pretty early in the process of purchasing PPE, and so they actually purchased a number of items ahead of what was then covered by the SU, the 200,000. So the point is, and you may recall, in the summer, we are all being told that critical items were in short supply. And so folks that were able to sort of assess inventory and then get right on a vendor and submit an order, you know, we approved them as soon as we could, you know, to deal with that issue about availability as of the first of the school year, where everybody was concerned about, can we open school and will the manufacturers actually deliver product? So that's what that's a reflection of, is kind of the different rates of being ready to purchase plexiglass, masks, cleaning supplies, and so on. But also, as you look into the detail there, you'll see in some instances, schools had not planned on expanding the number of, say, Chromebooks for that particular year. But when the pandemic hit, those districts that did not have an adequate cycle of you know, equipment went forward. So that's another one of those purchases that were not you know, universal. We have got to a place, I think, where we do feel that we have adequate equipment, and in general, our back orders for equipment, supplies, materials have been filled. There are some open orders, of course, but fortunately, the industry partners, our vendors, you know, have done a great job fulfilling our orders.
Thank you, Frank.
Sure. I also just, same thing, Tim, on the CARES Act, maybe I already answered the question, but in terms of the variability in spending by school in this section here that I'm looking at, 562,000, it really represents the fact that Putney did a major energy retrofit and improvement project in 2008, and then another in 2010. So those 1950s era unit ventilators had been replaced, so they didn't need a substantial reinvestment there, whereas Academy and Guilford did not. So those are the kinds of things that explain a real substantial variation from building to building in terms of spending. Okay, so David, I'll switch gears to the just our general budget discussion, and I know I will keep it brief just because I know we have a lot more on the agenda.
Yeah, you don't have to be that brief because we do have the whole process ahead of us, but thanks. And
Yeah.
I'd asked about that one bond payment that we made, just to sort of clarify what that is.
Right, yeah, so I thought that's what I would actually focus on tonight, just because it's a big ticket part of our budget, and it's a good thing for folks to be familiar with. So here's the Vermont Bond Bank website, and we look at this every year when we need to start the process that we are in right now, which is the preliminary budget planning. And here's the so if any of you folks were interested, you can go to the same Bond Bank webpage that I am on right here. And here are the 3 open loans that are in process of being paid back. The high school is the $6.4 million outstanding. The principal payment that David just referred to is $1.6 million annually. We've been doing that since I think it's 2005. And that is scheduled to be retired in our fiscal year 2024. So I'll show you the amortization schedule for that. The only other bond debt that we have in the Windham Southeast School District is the 2 loans I mentioned with Putney, and an outstanding principal of $546,000 in an initial bond, and then a second bond of $360,000 remaining outstanding principal. So when you add all of that up, that's the $7.3 million that Windham Southeast School District owes. And, we report that in the audit report. And of course, each year we have to make a principal payment and an interest payment. This is the quick kind of flashback to the connecting to the budget and the way we capture information. Just kind of reminding you that you remember when we talked about function codes, the 1000s are direct instruction, where most of the money is. And then the 2000 codes are broken into student support services, staff support services, and administration, and then building. The bond goes into the 5000 code. So when we organize information by function codes, which is quite standard, and that's the way we put it in our annual reports, you're going to see bond debt down toward the bottom of the page as it relates to any specific school, because it's in the 5000s as opposed to direct instruction, which is the 1000s. So there's the kind of the source of the bond schedule. Let me just flip to one more piece of information that if you clicked on the export the spreadsheet that I was just on in the bond bank, you would get this actual detailed schedule that I've just shared with you here. And what this is showing is the same information, but a little more detailed. And what you didn't see is the interest expense that goes with the principal. So here's the high school. It was refinanced in 2012. Here's all those $1.6 million payments. Here's the Putney payments that are 42 plus 30 now that are ongoing. I mentioned fiscal year 24 for the high school is here, ends in November of 2023. That's our fiscal year 24. So after that, we will not have that substantial expense. But you see the Putney debt goes till 2032, out there quite a ways. I've got some numbers here at the bottom here. The only thing that I thought I'd mention is that, you know, for us, when we're doing our fiscal year 22 budget, we're going to have 4.8 million left after we pay our bills this year. That, David, you just saw the bond payment and the warrants, and we'll still have this 834,000 for Putney, you know, into the future. And then here's the difference. The total debt remaining is 5.1 million, and then these two figures of another million. The incremental amount is the interest expense. And you know, well, I will take, for the budget that we're developing, these two numbers up here, just the May payment, and it's a semi-annual interest payment. So we include one principal payment and two interest expense payments every year. So we just pull it off this schedule and we put it into the budget. And that's under the section 5000 on the function, and it's in the object codes, the 800 series. We haven't talked about too much detail on the object codes, but I thought we might do that next meeting. So there's a overview of a significant cost to the school districts that you will see in the draft budget that we anticipate having ready for the board in December.
We got a question from Jackie and from Sean.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Sorry about that. It took a minute to unmute. I just wondered if we hypothetically, UHS debt, if we could pay off the Putney debt earlier and save interest by doing that, or is it kind of locked into the term?
That's a great question. I've asked the bond bank director to make sure you let us know if we could refund these bonds. The trouble is they were refunded once already, and the answer so far has been they are not a callable bond at this point. But particularly with the Putney debt going out so far, and the new debt today, interest rate is quite a bit lower. If it's an opportunity, I will definitely initiate that. But at this point, the way it was structured and resold, it's not an option for us at this point.
Thank you.
Thank
Sean?
you.
Oh, go ahead, Jackie. Sorry.
Nope, I was just saying.
Okay. Sean?
Yeah, I was just wondering, everybody hear me?
Yep.
Oh, here we go. I was just wondering if you could reiterate the relationship between the cap and the bond debt?
Sure. And when you say the cap, Sean, I'm assuming you mean the spending cap that the legislature puts on that it triggers a penalty.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. So for districts like us where we're carrying a very high debt load relative to the average district, the legislature recognized that, for us, it's $1,000 per student that we're carrying. When we go to the public and you see the numbers $17,000, $18,000 per student, right? That's our budget when you look at your budget annual report. Well, $1,000 of that, or actually a little more than that, is associated with debt. And a lot of other schools don't carry that because they did not make the $55 million investment that Brattleboro Union did in 2004-05, and or what Putney did in 2008, 9, 10. So the legislature recognized you don't want to incentivize school boards and communities for just ignoring facility needs, and they exempted state board approved projects from the penalty. So some of you may remember, actually, I believe it is this most recent, I think it was the prior budget where we were slightly over the cap that Sean is referring to. And that's on that summary tax page. It's page 12 of the annual report. I'm just glancing at it now on my hard copy. The threshold number the state set was 18,756 for the fiscal year 21. This is on your page 21, page 12 of your annual report, if you were looking at it. And to Sean's point, our proposed budget in fiscal year 21 that was approved is 18,932, which is a few dollars more than the 18,756. But we're not being penalized for that because the state allows us to remove the cost associated with the bond payment from the calculation when you go to the tax table to say what does each town owe as a result of the school board and then the voter approved budgets.
Thank you, Frank. It's really an important point to make about deciding not to let facilities continue to degrade. And one of the reasons that the 55 million was that high was because the district had not been investing over time, and there's a lot of things that need to be repaired. Any other questions from the board?
Okay, maybe one last.
Yeah, well, Tara Castine has a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Tara.
Sorry, this is Tara. I was wondering if I missed what the 2 Putney loans were for. If you could remind me, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if Herb has joined us this evening, but these were improvements that were done in 2000, and my understanding, 8, 9, and 10. It was before my tenure at Windham Southeast, but in general, I'm aware that it had a lot to do with energy upgrades. It retrofitted the heating plant. I believe there was a significant amount of work in the gymnasium done. So those were the projects that I have seen, certainly the legacy of, that has put Putney in good shape.
And that was a wood chip boiler project, was it, Frank? A biofuel project? Yeah.
That's right. It included a wood chip boiler project. Yeah.
Thanks.
I did want to mention just one last comment relative to debt and bond amortization, borrowing, and so on, and that is the direct connection, of course, to the capital plan. And we're very mindful of those assets that were brought to the Brattleboro public school community back in 2003, and then what we just referred to in Putney. They have a useful life, and they have to be replaced. So it's important that we recognize that we should not anticipate just not seeing a component of, for example, in the BUHS budget, that 1.6 million, we should expect that there will be a reinvestment to sustain that useful life into the future. And that's what, of course, the capital plan articulates. And in the high school, again, I'm just looking at page 23 of the annual report. If you wanted to take a look at that at some point, we've got, nearly $2 million articulated in that plan, a little more than that in that plan for the next 5 years. And those are a direct result of sustaining the assets, the unit ventilators, the air handling units, the boiler plant, and to some extent, the roof and some of the infrastructure that makes that building a great learning environment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, well, we'll look forward to getting into object codes next time.
Glad to do it. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Next on the agenda is the administrative report. Andy's going to give us an update on the what it means to transition from step 2 to step 3. So, Andy, go ahead.
I actually have very, very minimal to report tonight. Sorry, I got muted again somehow. I have actually very little, I have a minimal report. We're continuing to assess where we are right now. We had talked, we had discussed with our faculty and our leadership group that we've identified and targeted a group of students that we'd like to bring back for more in-person days. We're still continuing to develop the planning around that and meet with those staff members, both leadership teams and school-based teams, to move forward on that front. So we're still looking at what those items are. We're also awaiting additional guidance. We've been told is going to be released this week from the Department of Health and the Agency of Education that are updates to the Strong and Healthy Start document. There have been a few things that have been alluded to, especially around the travel time period that are coming up, but we are not exactly sure what those items are going to look like yet. So it's a bit of a game of conjecture right now in trying to determine what is going to be taking place. We surveyed our staff last week and to get a sense of how our Wednesday is going for them. The idea around the survey was to get us to develop some interpretations in terms of the use of our Wednesdays. Wednesdays have been used as a fully remote day for all students with professional development and grade level meetings. The range of responses that came out, generally teachers felt thankful and appreciative for the time on Wednesdays, but in general said there's not enough of it and the days are really packed, and the day being so packed is what leads to some of the stress. And so we've had discussions about right sizing it and seeing what we can do to create some additional changes that we've talked about. Interestingly enough, our hybrid teachers, so when we sorted out and disaggregated the data on that, our hybrid teachers all the teachers were asked about like what were 4 things that they would benefit most from, or thought that they would benefit the most from. And the hybrid teachers largely tended to answer that really self-directed study related to their school-based goals and team time were the things that they found the most valuable and impactful for them. And our remote teachers found that focus on remote learning and remote teaching, as well as team-based or team or grade level time was critical to them. In general, there was a sense of this was an opportunity where teachers expressed a degree of stress. The workload is hard. There were some comments that, again, it was a small sample size, 133 people responded. Concerned about how are we balancing the workload with people. There was a sense that was a counterbalance to that, where there was optimism and excitement about bringing more students back. And the idea around more tech support was necessary. And it wasn't tech support in terms of connectivity issues or devices. It was just that, well, in the old days, pre-COVID, we would say that elbow to elbow support around how do we make something happen and how do we do something and how do we bring that to life. So that's where we are with the group. We continue to plan. We continue to enlist the feedback from those around us and work with our leadership teams around what those plans are moving forward. I think the news we're going to hear from the AOE, we're waiting on confirmation of a couple rumored items that really wouldn't be great to say at this time what those rumored items are, but we have to get confirmation of what those items are in the next few days as we move forward in our planning.
Andy, did you say it was 135 responses to the survey?
133.
133. How is that distributed?
So I do a weekly, just like I do a weekly email to the parents, I do a weekly email to the staff. So it's delivered generally about the same time every week. So it was delivered that way.
That's a kind of low response rate for something as important as that. I'm surprised at that.
I think it's a reflection that people are tired. We've done a lot of surveys for people as well. So the staff will, the school administration's been surveying their staff around their needs and their wants for a while. You know, out of the teaching staff, it was actually, a little less than a third of or a little more than a third of what the teaching staff is, which has actually been I would say right now, give a pretty decent return limit.
Great. Thanks for that information. Tim has a question.
Yeah, I know the district has done everything possible to make the schools as safe for a return as they can. But I think my feelings about my concern about the expected surge, the third wave that will hit the country in the fall and the winter. So I wrote to you about the possibility of going fully remote from just before Thanksgiving to January 6th. So my question is, if Vermont, despite all its efforts, sees a surge, are you prepared for going fully remote during the holiday season?
That's a good question, because
I shared with our leadership teams today, Tim, that we're really kind of planning in 4 dimensions right now. The first dimension is how are we bringing back K-1 students? The next is how are we bringing back 2 through 6? The third dimension is in the multi-dimensional chess game that this is what does this look like for a second semester, and what level of information we need to assess from parents around about conversations that we had, as well as with faculty around our capacity to continue to honor those obligations we've made to them around the learning environments we've created that we're trying to follow. And then the fourth piece that always hangs out there is what do we do if there is a surge? And so we were anticipating additional information this week around what are some of the restraints around the travel period. It has come up in certain circles with concerns around the travel around Thanksgiving time period. What does that mean for families, and what does that mean for staff? In other areas, smaller communities with not as deep of a sub pool or not as deep of a bench, as we might say, what are we going to do if we don't have any people to pull in to pinch hit or to spell relief? I'm making my World Series metaphors right now.
Good timing.
So those items, those are all big pieces of conversation. I'm hoping to hear more this week so we get guidance from the Agency of Education on that regarding what happens with that. It's a really tricky balancing act, and we want to weigh the needs of the academic, social, emotional, and physical health needs of our staff and our students. And we're going to continue to listen to the feedback that we have from the governor and who's in the secretary who are responding to the surge in the area.
It's the
Thanks,
thanks, Tim. I just looked at the state dashboard today just to kind of get a sense of. I had some questions from the community about increasing in-person teaching and just a range of questions around COVID. So I went and looked at the data, and through the summer, particularly Windham County, the number of cases was really low. There were a few weeks when there were none, but in the last week there were 8. And across the state, the graph has gone up. It was down well below the spring and early summer throughout the summer, and now it's back up to sort of later in not the highest levels, but it's starting to climb back up for the last couple of weeks. The daily numbers are higher, and that was widely anticipated when people started to be indoors more. And obviously there was an outbreak in the 30 cases in the hockey community in central Vermont. But those numbers, we are seeing that increase, that fall and winter increase that was projected is happening across the country. So, but with what we are facing going ahead with more in-person learning, just seems to make sense.
Yeah.
And we know the things we're doing to avoid spread works. There's just examples from all over the world.
It is a horrifying clown.
Oh, yeah, it is. I think that was-
Sorry, somebody just unmuted themselves. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, no. So I have a couple additions are there any other questions around I have a couple additions to some leadership academies at Oak Grove and Putney, as well as a teacher candidate to bring forward as well.
I don't see any other questions, so go ahead.
So Mary Kaufman, are you here? I'm not sure if you want to talk about your leadership academy people. I mean, your leadership advisory council.
Sure. I had two family members reach out interested in joining the Oak Grove Leadership Council. One was Corey DeMario, parent of a 5th grade student, and the other was Hannah Tustin, and she is the mother of a 3rd grader.
Did those, Wendy, do you have those names?
Yeah, I believe I do. You sent me
Okay,
and Andy sent
yeah.
an additional one. So
Yeah,
yeah.
those came today. Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry, Mary. I just, Wendy has to get all this in a minute, so
Sure, no problem.
I don't have to ask you to spell those names now. So could we have a motion, please, to approve Corey DeMario and Hannah Tustin to the Oak Grove Leadership Council, please?
So moved, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. Second?
Second, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. It's been moved and seconded to add Corey DeMario and Hannah Tustin to the Oak Grove Leadership Council. All those in favor, please unmute and indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
And I have additions to or re-upping the Putney Leadership Council. Herb sent me the names. He's not able to be here tonight due to a family commitment. We have Ruby McAdoo, Tara Castine, Jamie Contois, Marie Duralt as community members and parents. And from the staff would be Herb, Lynn Borowski, and Steve Head.
And Wendy does have those names ahead of time, so I'd ask for a motion to approve the new members for the Putney Leadership Council as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Liz. Second, please.
Seconded.
Thank you, Tim. Moved and seconded to accept the nominations to the Putney Leadership Council. All those in favor, please indicate by unmuting and saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Any other questions for Andy?
So one more, we have a tentative hire for our grade 3 remote for the Guilford Vernon Putney cohort.
Mhm.
Reference checks were completed. The individual has not been offered the position yet, but given the timing of things, we'd like to get tentative approval if she so chooses. Deb Cardane was heavily involved in the search. I can turn it over to Deb to share any information if you'd like to proceed on that.
Yeah, Deb, please.
Sure. Just a quick summary of the process. We've advertised for quite a few weeks. We advertised widely using SchoolSpring. I forwarded the advertisement to 3 universities, UMass, Antioch, and Upper Valley Educators Institute. We had a solid pool for the times that we're in, and narrowed that down to a few candidates. And we've gone through interviews and had some modeling of lessons, and now we're in a good place to hopefully offer a job.
Okay. Tim.
What did you make any special efforts to attract diverse candidates?
Yes, that was specifically why I reached out to those 3 universities.
Great. Thank you, Deb. Other questions? Okay, so you want a motion to a tentative motion? How do you do a tentative motion?
We'd like a motion to approve the hiring of this individual, and that will allow us to move forward with her before the next board meeting.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. Without having a name, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we do that because the board doesn't know who really they're approving, and if they knew that person or had reservations or other people had contacted them, I'm not sure how we would know. So any ideas?
I think would it be similar to how we approved a tentative leave of absence in the past for an individual? Should that person accept it, we would move forward. We could provide Wendy the name for the record after the fact if she accepts the name, if she accepts the position. Could we do that? Or would you want us to, perhaps maybe the motion would be you would approve us to offer the position and then we would confirm the name at the next meeting.
Yeah, let's do that. That would be good. Because I'm concerned that one of the reasons that we approve these is that the board reflects, has knowledge of people in the community, and there may be reasons to not approve people. It's one of the reasons that boards approve hires. And that gets, we're going around behind that one if we approve somebody without knowing who they are. So let's see. So let me see if I can craft a motion here. Can we have a motion to tentatively approve a new hire for the grade 3 remote? Is it, Andy?
Yes.
For the grade 3 remote position.
And this is a 1-year position. So
1 year, for 1 year, subject to
the candidate accepting the position.
But what was the condition for presenting the name at the next meeting? Or
well, we wanted to get just so that you would have the name for the record. The issue is we have a need here now because Deb is pushing in and doing this work, but we just
Right.
finished the reference checks now. But if we
Right.
offer her the position, I want Deb back on the curriculum team full time.
well, yeah, and I don't want to hold this up at all. I just know that one of the things that we're supposed to do is know who we're hiring, and in this case we can't, and we need the person in. And I'm just stuck. I don't know what to do. Kelly's got her hand up. Thank you, Kelly. Bail me out here.
So they could tentatively offer the person the position pending the school board's approval.
And then and I guess you're right, we could go forward with all the paperwork and process and get a start date, and then the start date would be as early as after the next board meeting, the day after the next board meeting.
Yep, that would work. Jackie?
Would we need to call it a conditional offer of employment just so that it carries the implication that we still have the right to say, oh, we do know this person, it's not a good fit? No? The words conditional offer maybe need to be included.
I'm just trying to write that down. Remember. Okay, so the motion's getting longer and longer. Thomas?
I was just going to say, I know nobody likes more meetings, but we could just do a very, very quickly warned meeting.
Yeah, we could
afterwards, just to confirm it.
And it just needs to be the personnel meeting that the personnel committee is empowered to do to offer or to approve the hire as well. So it doesn't even need to be the full board, just a quorum of the personnel meeting.
Well, I'm not so sure about that either, but I think Thomas has got the right idea. We just need a quorum. If not, look into the personnel committee issues. So can we do it that way? offer the position. If they accept it, we'll convene a special meeting within 24 hours and approve it.
Yep.
Great, good, because I don't want to, I just, until I get a chance to clarify all of this, I don't want to move forward. It's just something we haven't done before. And it doesn't really fit into my understanding of our hiring responsibility. So I just want to clarify that. So we will table the approval until we have confirmation that the person wants, that the person accepts the position. Is that it? Is that what we're waiting for?
Now I'm stuck. I thought you were going to say, yes, go ahead, vote, say, go ahead to offer the position conditionally, and then we would need to confirm it.
Okay, let's do that. Yep. So we don't need a motion to confirm, offer the position, and then we'll confirm it when the paperwork's done and you're certain that this is the person.
Great.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
That's all I've got, David.
Good. Well, that was the hardest part. Okay, next are committee reports. And again, as I said, we wanted to move our pre-K partners to the top of the list this time. So Mariah, do you have, I know we received monthly reports, but going over them was not part of the agenda. And we are going to be talking in depth about pre-K on November 18th. So I thought, but if people have questions, or Mariah, if you have anything you wanted to highlight or otherwise say, please take the floor.
Hi, we're counting 183 students and we have 13 partners. We weren't sure if the board had any specific questions that they wanted us to answer next month.
Oh, that's a good question. Yep. Thinking about pre-K, which we've done a lot. Are there any questions we want to be sure we find out about during the pre-K presentation on the 18th? Any board members have specific questions about pre-K? Jackie with a baby in her arms might have something.
We based our reports off of Brattleboro Town School Board's principal reports.
Right.
So if you want changes in the way we report, we can do that also. We were just looking for any specifics.
We had a lot of documents to look at for this meeting, so I'm not sure how fully people were able to go over them. So I think between now and the 18th, I'll be sure to remind people to have a look at them and think particularly about the kinds of information that we'd like to have if it's different than what's currently there.
That sounds good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Leadership Council reports. Any Leadership Council meetings this week that want to report? I know Ruby's got, well, we heard about what they did, part of what they did. Sean?
Yeah, the Guilford Leadership Council met on Friday, October 16th, and it was 11 people in attendance. Beth Bristol, the chair, went through the what is the job of the Leadership Council. And I would have to say that Guilford has been very busy implementing all the things that need to be implemented by the Leadership Council very effectively. John gave a pretty comprehensive report, and he did touch on the item that Andy had spoken about in terms of increased hybrid and remote numbers. And then the Guilford Leadership Council has quite a few events planned to try to create a greater community among the remote and the hybrid students. And there's a lot of energy every time at that meeting just to try to deal with what needs to be dealt with, in addition to very sensitive ideas about everything because of the pandemic. So it's a good group, and it was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Emily?
So I know last time we didn't get to report out on Academy's Leadership Council, and Kelly Diaz is now here. So I was going to defer to her since I was not able to make the first meeting, which was pre our last school board meeting. Kelly, would you like to say something? Please, on the spot.
Sure. I don't have the notes pulled up, so forgive me if I miss something, but we had a joint meeting of our PTO, which we call ACT, and the Leadership Council, just because neither group had met yet this year, and it felt like a good time to gather and talk about our mutual goals and the purposes for each group. So we spent some time just kind of reviewing our norms and then talking about the mission for each group, the Leadership Council and the PTO, and discussing whether we thought it made sense to have one joint meeting or two separate meetings. And the outcome of that was me creating a survey, which I just put out this week for families to give us feedback about that. So I'm waiting for some more responses before I make a conclusion about that. That was pretty much it. We talked about just the reentry of school, how it's going, what the breakdown is of remote and hybrid learners and staffing, and talked about some of our health and safety protocols in the school. People had time to ask questions, and that was about it.
Great, thank you. Ruby?
Hi, Ruby McAdoo, Putney Central School. We had a small group. This was before we appointed the people that you appointed tonight. And we discussed family engagement and brainstormed on different things that hopefully in the next meeting we'll select one, maybe two of them to try to tackle, which is something we kind of struggled with over the summer. We discussed the diversity committee and the Black Lives Matter mural, and kind of collaborating and interacting with the diversity committee and also the equity and inclusion committee in Putney around allowing parents to have a voice in what's going on in our school and what's been painted on the ground. I think that the consensus, was that it's not necessarily only a school issue, but it's definitely important to many parents and families. We discussed and really felt strongly that the idea that I think has been floated by Michelle and the Communications Council before about some kind of a summit for leadership councils, we really want that. So we hear such great things about Guilford and how jazzed they are all the time. We kind of want to hear it directly from all the Guilford members of the Leadership Council. So if there could be a summit, that'd be great. We did establish a meeting cycle, which will be the first Thursday at 4:30 and the third Monday at 6:30. So that'll be twice in a month. And the goals for that are that we have one that's set a little earlier with the intention of capturing an easier time for staff to be involved, and one that is post working hours for working parents. And so the expectation is that Leadership Council members will come to as many of them as possible, but we may end up having business actions be in one, and the other one be more for deep dives into discussions that inform any action we take in the other. And then the last thing, which I think is really the most important, is that we had a really big chunk of our time was discussing Leadership Council recruitment, process, and intention. And my own comments, kind of as the chair, is that I think that we did discuss the things that were talked about at the last board meeting around kind of the culture of Putney's Leadership Council as it is so far in its infancy. And I think that we're really trying to face it head on. Herv was not at that meeting. I did have a follow-up with him that was actually really fruitful. And so I'm hopeful about it. But I think that we're still like getting our feet on the ground, but I think we still want to focus on values and what things that will help to communicate to you what our values are, and also just kind of try to get some stuff done, projects and things that would be really have a big impact. And so we're trying to identify those things so that we don't feel like we're spinning our wheels as much as we have in the last year. That's what I got.
Thanks, Ruby. Beth Bristol.
Yes, hi, thank you. I just wanted to add that Putney and really any leadership council that would be interested in sitting in on our meetings is more than welcome. We'd love to have you. Our next meeting is November 13th at 1 p.m. And then we're also holding a quarterly meeting on November 19th in the evening so that we can be more accessible to everybody, a wider audience. So our agendas will be online and we welcome anyone to join us.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up or flags to the Leadership Council reports.
David, could I?
Yes, go ahead, Ruby.
Beth saying that reminded me of something. We, in our discussion about the summit idea, it came up the idea of actually finding some forum or platform where the chairs of each of the leadership councils could communicate with each other, and that might help also to get the word out. Not every leadership council, I think, it's not quite as easy to find what they might not have a schedule of meetings yet, might not be posted. So if the chairs were able to communicate and there was a desire to I want to, let's go to their leadership council meeting, we would have an easier way of connecting with them.
Great, thank you. Keith Lyman.
Hi, I just wanted to update you on the BAM's Leadership Council. We met last evening, and it's a small group, but some good energy. And we're struggling with some of the same things around what do people want from the group a little bit. So we discussed maybe putting out a survey to parents to find out what kind of topics they might want to consider talking about in a setting like that. But certainly trying to recruit more parents to become involved. Several dedicated teachers participating and just a few parents. So it's good. And our next scheduled meeting was supposed to be on election evening. So we'll do it a week from the election on Tuesday, whatever it is, the 10th at 6 p.m. So good start, but struggling for content, but very positive involvement from folks. That was it.
Great, thank you. I'll look into, I'll see if I'll contact some of the chairs and see if I can figure out how to put together something for ways for mutual support. And Beth's suggestion of I know Liz has gone to a lot of the Leadership Council meetings and has a pretty good sense of how they're running and how they're different. So I may need to do a little more of that. One of the things that generally people are interested in is talking about money, and the principal budget requests. I don't recall when they're due in, but I think it's pretty soon, if not already. And that could certainly be a topic that might attract some interest and give people a place to start a conversation. I don't see any other hands, so we're going to move on to the WSESD, WSESU Diversity Equity Committee. And did you folks meet?
We did, Dave. And I took a few notes. I would have to remind the board that as a faculty committee, this committee is not subject to open meeting law. Nonetheless, we had a brief discussion of the defacement of the Putney mural, and a retreat is being planned for the 28th of October regarding the commitment to social justice and the goals for this group. The updates are that all of our schools, as nearly as I can figure, have begun organizing. Many have met, many have organized into smaller groups. And Putney in particular is asking if there are ways to incorporate families and community. And a discussion topic for next time will be, how do we deal with resistance? After that, we had a discussion of Stamped by Jason Reynolds and discussed the difference between racist, not a racist, assimilationist, and anti-racist, and how most of us have moments of each. And a topic for the next meeting is also how to address parental concerns. Corey, I see you're there. Do you want to add anything?
Corey, go ahead and unmute if you do.
I guess not.
He may have taken a lunch break. Okay, thank you, Ann. It's a pretty impressive agenda. Finance Committee.
Finance Committee has not met, but I feel like I'm crying wolf a little bit here. But we will have a meeting on November 4th at 5 o'clock prior to this meeting. And Frank and I have discussed what the agenda will be a little bit. And so that is the plan. Let's hope it comes to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. And Personnel Committee.
We have not met.
Thanks, Kelly. Policy Amendment Committee.
Has not met.
I'm pretty sure we didn't. Yep. Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee. I think since we're doing a presentation, Emily, unless you have anything specific you wanted to mention just as an update to people, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we'll be hearing from that committee in a little bit.
Yep, so I just wanted to say that at our last meeting, we were looking at the issue tracker and planning our work forward. And we specifically brought up a new item to place on our tracker, which was around our COVID, our COVID protocols and how we've implemented schooling in the district. So a few of the things we were specifically looking at was equity and internet access, quality of educational experience in asynchronous and synchronous learning. And I think there might have been a few other things that we were looking at, but I know that we're kind of making progress on that. Some of it will be discussed in this meeting. Others, we're going to have some presentations coming up specifically around the equity and internet access at our subcommittee meetings. So information to see what we can do to support things here in the district.
Great, thank you. There were a couple more things in there. I can't get them right back to mind, but if anybody wants to, they're in the minutes, so you can look them up. And Climate Crisis Task Force, Thomas, any updates beyond what's going to be in the presentation?
Just tonight's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Communications Council, Michelle?
We haven't met.
Okay. And the Social Justice Committee?
We'll be meeting on Monday at 4:30.
Great, thank you. And to continue
to continue working on the implementation of our commitment.
Great,
yep.
Great, thank you. And the SU board, I saw Carrie come in. Are you still here?
I am. We have not met.
Great. Thank you. So that's it for committees. So on to the unfinished business. The first one is the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee Title IX report. This is a report that's been many months in the works. Lots of research, lots of responses and information from administration and the athletic director to help us get a really solid sense of the equity in our co-curricular program. So Emily, we'll turn it over to you. And I believe if you need to, you can share your screen.
Perfect. So we hadn't actually discussed how we were going to present this. So I'm thinking I put together a little PowerPoint that was just essentially our report for recommendations in more of a visual form. So since nobody's seen this yet, it's all of the stuff we already, it's like directly copied from there, but I figured the community members who haven't had a chance to review our recommendations, this might help them to follow along. So let me go to full screen here. How do I do that? Play. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes,
Okay.
well, I can.
Okay. So I'll just go on through. So this was taken on by the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee. It was actually taken on back in the spring. I forget when first Chris Sawyer sent us the report, but it was something I think around maybe like early May. We received the report that was done, which was just an internal look at how equity was going, specifically gender equity in athletic programs at the middle and high school, middle meaning BAMS, not the middle schools at Demerston and Putney and Guilford. Here's our committee members. So here we go. So this just pretty much says what I just said. So we'll keep moving. So our focus specifically in our recommendations was taken from Title IX and was really looking at how equity appears in these 7 categories. And you'll see these categories listed in our report. There's also in Chris Sawyer's report, which I hope everybody has a chance to review because he put a lot of work into that and there was a lot of wonderful information and a lot of thinking about proportionality in our sports and what sports are offered. Those items we haven't made recommendations for because, I mean, actually all of Chris's report suggested that we don't have, there's not an issue of equity necessarily as defined by Title IX. So that's wonderful because we're kind of hitting all the components that are required nationally. At the same time, we're always kind of at the cutting edge here in Brattleboro and we want to push the bucket. So our report focused on, or our recommendations focused on these 7 categories. And actually Chris's report also looked at these 7 categories and made some recommendations. So we mirror a lot of his recommendations and some of them are expanded upon. So categories. So protective equipment, athletic coaching, and other athletic supplies. Actually, before I go into this, I put this at the end of the report, but what we're looking for at this moment from the committee is we're looking for the board to approve the recommendations that we're offering. That's the first thing. The second thing is if they do approve, then we would like to ask the communications committee to write some type of small piece or article that could then be shared with the public to say how we're addressing equity in athletics or how we're at the cutting edge and we're kind of pushing forward. And this is one of our things we're taking on. And the third thing, I don't know if there's a third thing. The third thing might be at the end of the report. So we'll just wait till we get there. But keep that in mind as we're kind of going through because some of these people might have objections to, or other ones they might want to add stuff or have questions about. So our recommendations regarding protective equipment, athletic coaching, and athletic supplies are threefold. We wanted more well-defined procedures around inventorying. So it is the case that I know this past spring, Chris had said that they were doing a lot of inventorying around, what equipment existed, what were the schedules for replacement, which they had, but, and they had kind of listed out for years past, but I don't know that that was done on a consistent basis. So we couldn't really hear a report about that. If we just wanted one right this second, Chris would have to do a bunch of work. So kind of keeping that data keeping and keeping a list of stuff that's purchased by the Booster Club in our school inventory. And then looking a little bit about how teams fundraise and how is this process initiated and how are funds dispersed? Does everybody kind of have equal access to these? These are things that kind of like seem to be going on in a happenstance matter, but we maybe a little bit more of an approach that encourages all teams to do this, or at least where we can receive information on how funds are kind of being used, because that could indicate that some programs actually have a little bit more opportunity because they have more funds because they're fundraising. And that would be good to know. Because when questions come up from the community, these are the things that are easily answerable if they, if we keep some data on that. We have, this was the second category, and I remember all these categories were taken from Title IX. So these were things that Title IX requires that we hit certain markers on. We're doing really well, and no recommendations overall at this time, but we had some items to consider. Some of them are a little bit broader. So we did think a little bit on the committee about facility improvements to Sawyer Field, maybe connected to the Gale report. So that should be coming up soon. Actually, I'm not 100% sure when the Gale report will be finished, and maybe after this presentation, or, after I talked for a little bit, Chris maybe can update us on the status of that. But address Fort Denver upgrades, quality of turf, field configuration, that regarding, some teams using the locker, like there's a meeting space in the boys' locker room, not a meeting space in the girls' locker room. How are teams using them? Do girls teams need to utilize a meeting space? If so, do they have access to that kind of thing? And especially there was some conversation too around boys teams using the girls' locker rooms in certain cases. So just surveying everybody to see does everybody feel like they're adequately kind of equipped to do what they need to do? And we'd like it to be disaggregated by interest group. This is kind of our theme, so that we can kind of see who's maybe, who needs what. Transportation, we didn't have any recommendations. The compensation of coaches, there was a lot of conversation on the committee about encouraging women and people of color to seek coaching positions. In the report, although this is kind of beyond the Title IX requirements, as most of these things are, it was suggested that there is a predominance of male coaches. Nothing wrong about men coaching, but we would like to encourage women and people of color to have some more coaching opportunities in our district, and specifically too for women's sports. We'd love to see that. So we put that, and yeah, the last one is be mindful that a balance should be kept between the number of coaches for female sports compared to male sports, especially during transition post-COVID. So, there are some sports that require more coaching. I know a community member recently reached out saying how many coaches are there for football? How many coaches are there for this? Some sports require a little bit more, but just being mindful about a balance and how many coaches we have for both genders. Publicity, marketing, and media service, the committee didn't come up with any recommendations regarding this at this time. Game and practice times and scheduling, all of this you can see in Chris's report, how practice times and scheduling are occurring and who's using what field at what time. And there was really no recommendations around that. Facilities and access to training and medical services. So we did have a few recommendations here. We wanted this was a lot to do with the weight room. So there's a lot of conversation about, is the weight room used in a fashion that encourages all teams to access it, JV and varsity, what sports are using it, and specifically are female athletes using it. And so we just wanted to ensure that there are some rules and sign-up sheets and clearing of weights and all these best practices that can expand, hopefully, the usage for especially for girls who want to use the weight room. Surveying females, because it was brought up that maybe females weren't using the weight room as much, so survey them to see why they're not using the weight room. And then survey non-athletes about usage. Are they, because they can have access to this too. And then reach out to the community to understand how best to make an action plan to ensure the weight room is more inclusive and welcoming. So we were thinking here, conversation on the committee revolved around connecting with gyms in the area and other folks to see how do they ensure that their facilities are being used by all that are in their community. So and we were open to a conversation about having a facilitator for the weight room. That was brought up. Chris and Steve brought up, I believe, at a PPC meeting, that one thing that holds people back is that there's nobody monitoring the weight room. So that becomes a challenge because in order for students and athletes to use the weight room, there has to be an adult in there supervising. So unless a coach is encouraging this or is on staff, there's nobody there. So that might be limiting access, but again, we probably should be surveying a little bit to find out what's going on there. So those were our the seven kind of categories that were listed in Chris's report. And we have a broader request too, but I can stop here for now and then we can go to the broader. I don't know if any of the other committee members want to clarify anything I said, or again, we hadn't discussed how we were exactly going to present this. So, or perhaps Chris, because you wrote the report, maybe you'd like to say something, or Steve, I know you were very involved in it too. So everybody should feel free to comment, and then maybe some questions, people have them.
Just please put your hand up so we can have it one person at a time if anybody does want to comment or questions. You can also save for the end. I think your presentation is really pretty thorough. I'm not sure the committee would have much to say. Ruby has a question.
Ruby McAdoo, Putney Central School. Emily, this is just a clarifying question, and I think I know the answer to it, but I'd like to hear it articulated because I might be wrong. So this report, or these recommendations seem to be all related to BUHS and maybe BAMS, but not the elementary schools. And so I want to understand, but I can't remember the title page, but I don't feel like was articulated as just a BUHS relative kind of inquiry of yours. And so if it's not, I just want to understand the framing, because it doesn't seem relevant to, say, for example, the middle schools that are not on the campus of BUHS and BAMS. But maybe I guess that's just my question of what is this particularly relating to?
You're correct, Ruby. So this is relating to BUHS and BAMS participants who are, participating in co-curricular activities. So we chose to do it this way because one, the financial reporting of things are either co-curricular activities, after school programming, and after school care, as we've kind of been discussing. So all this stuff is overlapping, but this was specifically looking at athletics as defined by co-curricular activities, which was BUHS and BAMS. And that was actually, it gives a little nice of a segue. Like, we had a lot of discussion on the committee about, what is the access to athletic opportunities for middle schoolers who do not go to BAMS. And it does speak to, I'll just fast forward to our larger equity question, because you brought it up and people can feel free to comment on either. The PPC we were interested in seeing some kind of computer moderated survey to the whole community, talking about value of athletics, opportunities throughout our schools and grades, if not intramurals, intramurals, how are we tracking the goals and the purpose of athletics in the schools? Like, maybe different schools have there's a different purpose for each, school, or different goals they're working on, and how do we ensure we're meeting those goals? And then how are we valuing based on how we're placing money? So are we giving enough, for example, are we giving enough money you're in Putney, to Putney for athletics? Or maybe Putney says, actually, you know what, we think we have enough. We really, we're placing a lot of our stuff in theater. I don't know, whatever you're doing. But we felt on the committee, without a larger survey, we didn't really know, not just gender equity, but how is equity being addressed for athletic opportunities more broadly. So that goes to your question, because it does target the elementary schools, whereas the rest of the report didn't, or it targets the middle schools that are not at BAMS, I should say, because none of the elementary schools really have sports connected, except for winter sports.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Michelle, did you not decide, do you still have a question?
I was just gonna ask Emily if the report, the internal report that the athletic department did is something that could be shared with the board at some point so that we can see it for reference.
David, was it shared with the board? I thought it was.
I think when it first came out, it went to everyone, and it should be on the
Let's
website. We should
reshare it.
post it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should post
Okay.
it. It's
you.
on
Yeah.
the G drive, but I'm not sure who can access that. That might just be our committee at this point. We'll get it up there though.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to read it. I mean, it's fairly long because Chris put in so much good stuff, but it's really interesting to see how, what is Title IX compliance. So it's a good read, and as I said, we're going kind of above and beyond, so it makes you feel good.
I don't see any more questions, Emily, or comments. So we'll go ahead with the final or the larger request.
So I guess the larger request was this, actually, like the larger equity request of some type of, and this might not be the right time to do a computer moderated survey, but what we thought here when we did our next step was that maybe we could vote on the recommendations and pass them off to the athletic department if we felt that these were good. All of the folks on the PPC have already said, these look good to us, but they would have to revote obviously here. And then I guess a separate request would be the column that the communications committee would write regarding sports and equity. And then additionally, you can see we request the athletic department develop a timeline for the recommendation. So we really didn't know, because of all this, of COVID specifically, we really didn't know what made sense to talk about when. And so we would put that on Chris, sorry, Chris. So to think a little bit about what makes sense right now. I know Chris wrote me an email today, and David, there's already stuff they're doing and they can, already provide data on because they've already done it essentially. So that would be like good to go. Other things like make sense in the spring or something. And we can help volunteer to support the athletic department determining how best to keep the board appraised of developments. So it might be appraised of developments. It might be like, like we hear from a lot of folks at different times of the year, there might be a specific time of the year where we're looking to hear about equity in athletics, or and we can talk about what makes sense there.
Before we move to the proposal, or back to the proposals and consider voting for them, there's a question or comment from Eric Liberdoni. Eric, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, currently the participants in the weight room generally reflect the coaches that are bringing kids in there. So the kids who play on those teams generally are the ones who are going to the weight room. Discussion about hiring a strength and conditioning coach for the district or for the high school and middle school as a part-time position, which might ensure that more kids and all kids feel welcome and comfortable in the weight room.
Well, that discussion would take place in the athletic department, and then it would come to the board. We haven't talked about it.
I think actually, David, it's not that we talked about saying like, yes, we want to do this, but I remember in the report, actually, Chris Sawyer did suggest that because it came up that like, there's coaches that volunteer to do this in their free time, they can do it. And then, maybe there are other coaches who, can't do that. So we put here a number 4 recommendation, just look back. We're open to a conversation of having a facilitator for the weight room, maybe from a local gym. I like your language, which is strength and conditioning coach. I wish you came to the committee meeting because we didn't have as professional a way of saying that, but somebody who really knew about this and who could man it at certain times. So even non-athletes could use it, would be ideal. So that's just something we're open to. Like the committee wasn't proposing to necessarily do it, but we would be open to seeing that maybe from Chris in a budget item and discussing further. Thank you though.
So what is the board's pleasure? Do we want to accept the report and the recommendations and hand them over to the administration as Emily outlined? Any thoughts or comments from the rest of the board? Thomas?
I mean, it's all very thorough and makes total sense to me. I'm comfortable with approving this and moving it on. I don't see anything really lacking on it. It looks very thought out.
Tim?
Oh, no, same as Thomas. I think it's ready to go.
Okay, Sean?
I was just wondering, are we delegating extra work upon some people if, am I muted? I'm sorry.
No, you're talking, we hear you.
All right. Are we delegating extra work on individuals by this recommendation? That's a question.
I think gradually, yes, certainly. We're making recommendations that things happen. So we certainly would be asking, I mean, we don't do this work. This isn't what we do. So yeah, people
Right,
would have,
so-
people would have to do things.
I would be more comfortable voting on something like this if we knew what these steps are going to mean for additional work for staff.
Well, we can go, Andy's got his hand up, so he may want to add something to that. We can also go through the recommendations and see what we think and what administrators or the others that are present think as well. Good
Yeah,
question.
I agree with you, Sean. I think there's no way of getting around it. This, especially right now, while the school's really grappling with how are we, how are we handling the times of COVID and meeting the needs of our most impacted population, that this is going to cause a lot of extra work. I'm worried about, as we look at FY22 and the planning, their recommendations around strength and conditioning coaches or extra trainers. Those are all, we already have a set of staffing priorities that we're looking at, that this would might impact our capacity to meet the essential needs and functions of the school, because we're looking at probably a contracting number of FTEs to work with to expand some really critical positions for schools. And so I get a little worried that some of these components kind of cross the over in the board's capacity from oversight into more management of the schools, which is more of the purview of the superintendent as the chief executive officer of the schools. So I do agree, though, Sean, to your point that this may be a lot of extra work in terms of especially designing a survey for people to get a sense of where they are within the use of different functions, or what this might look like.
It's just a couple quick responses. One is that this work started well ahead, probably a year ahead of the pandemic. And we're just completing that work. Obviously, the conditions have changed, and a lot of these things a lot of things that we think are going to have been normal aren't going to be normal next year or the year after. The other thing is that the survey, we specifically said we wanted to hire an outside contractor to do that, someone who was a professional organization to do a computer moderated survey, is it called, Emily?
Yes.
Yeah. So that wouldn't fall upon the staff. But let's go back and look at the recommendations and see where we're managing, because I'm curious to see. We need to define that. So let's start with the recommendations.
Let me just go down. Sorry. Yep. There you go.
So we're asking for defined procedures for inventorying equipment. We're asking to record equipment purchased by boosters, and to keep track the fiscal aspects of fundraising and the boosters. Is that over our boundary?
See, I would suggest in this aspect that the board would want to extend to the policy committee to develop a policy around boosters within schools. That I would suggest that this would be the area where we would look at the role of policy to guide us and to examine, do we have a policy around booster groups within the schools, and then use policy to develop the guidance for that. And then that's sustainable and lasting in terms of how it's guiding the work that's being done.
Right. And this is asking for the information that for how it's happening now to guide that, and see if we need a policy for that.
I would say the recommendation would probably be to develop a policy around fundraising within the schools and the use of booster clubs, based upon whatever there might be within existing model policy language.
Emily, go on to the others.
policy.
Oh, go ahead.
Right,
Yep.
I'm just typing a note because I won't remember.
Yep.
Okay. Locker rooms, practice facilities, competition. These are just considerations. So actually it's not a request, meaning we're just asking in the future to, keep this in mind.
And the next one, then?
Okay, no recommendation. Compensation of coaches.
And this is consistent with what we've been saying since we formed. We want to encourage women and people of color to seek positions.
Yeah,
And
compensations generally, that's usually a bargained piece within in terms of compensation of rates, that's usually in the master agreements.
Yeah,
Well,
we're not recommending.
Yeah, the reason, sorry to interrupt, but so Chris had certain, categories. So we just took that category from him and this is our recommendation under that category. But compensation, we know that it's a tiered compensation approach. This is more about how we're recruiting.
Okay, the next one.
I'm just going to skip the ones we don't have. In number 7, facilities and access, mainly about a lot of the weight room stuff.
So best practices for the weight room, survey of the students, basically.
Yeah.
Non-athletes. So I'm not sure if these are.
To me, that kind of gets into some more of the running of the schools and what would be entailed into running the schools, which would fall to Steve and Chris in the athletic department around.
So again, we'd want to look then at what policy we would want to have to guide this in terms of assuring that the non-students and female students or non-athletes and females it's equitably available to them.
So what I'm hearing is perhaps for this one, it sounds like there's a few that actually the recommendations could be accepted, but there's the protective equipment, but there's a few that perhaps we'd need a policy for. Is that the case? Or you're saying all of these need to be a policy, not a recommendation?
Well, I'm just wondering what's coming out of the recommendations are you looking for? I think because there's also directive of a timeline around those recommendations is where, and I'm questioning one, bandwidth of the people right now to do the work as they're working with some of these things, but to say that, for instance, make available the following best practices, it's more directive. Whereas that's the directive aspect, is one of those aspects that falls upon the shoulders of the superintendent to do so, to be the directive one.
So this is Chris talking. I don't know if you can hear me. I get my mouse to work to start my video. But I think looking at all these are all solid recommendations. A lot of them were already included in the report that we did. And I think to Andy's point, some of them are policy. For instance, we really don't have a fundraising policy. And that is something in the report that we noted. Some of our teams fundraise. We require our boys and girls ice hockey teams to raise money for ice time. So they definitely fundraise a lot more than other teams. And other teams don't necessarily have the needs or have a lot of participants. So there could be inequities involved with fundraising. And so I think that was one recommendation we noted. We would like to design a policy that would cover what is acceptable fundraising. Do we do it? How do we do it? How many teams? Is there a limit to money? So I think that's a policy. I think the other two, and that's not on the screen, but I think those are recommendations that we're already well on our way to achieving just based on our past report. And then number 7, the weight room. We have a certain space and certain money and considerations. So I think there is a policy that needs to be developed that's firm on who's going to use the weight room when we talk about athletes versus non-athletes. That would be a change, and that might need to be a policy discussion. And then who's supervising the weight room? Again, to Andy's point, it would take personnel, and I know Eric Liberdoni spoke up. Currently, coaches do monitor the weight room, But if we're talking equity, you know, I wouldn't use the word facilitator necessarily, but a strength and conditioning coach or another athletic trainer being on staff that could help programming and design, execute, to monitor the space. That's what we really need. So again, I think it might be policy between athletes, non-athletes, but the rest are recommendations that I think, you know, we've already done 1 and 2 here, or we pretty much know the answer to 2. 1's already accomplished. We have not surveyed non-athletes, but is that a policy? And then 4, we kind of have the answers to, but that might involve budget decisions.
Other thoughts or comments? Well, should we take this under consideration and go back to the committee and rework these and clarify these and come back?
Do you think, David, we should have I mean, maybe this is an offline conversation, but do you think we should have a meeting together with the policy? Can we do like a collaborative meeting with policy and amendments where we could work through this together? Or should we do it first through PPEC and then hand it over to policy and amendments?
Well, there's overlap on those committees for one thing. We certainly could meet with the policy committee.
Okay, that might be valuable because then we can kind of sort through, as Andy said, some of these things, you know, they might be suggestions, but it might fall out of our purview, which is helpful to know. And then other things we might be able to take more action on. So do we want to plan for that?
Yeah, I think we should probably, okay. Yeah, we should probably, the committee should meet at our next meeting, discuss how to go forward and figure out how to meet with the policy people.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, other comments related to the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee Title IX report? Selena Romo.
Hi there. I'm a school board member up in Marlboro that I'm just listening in tonight. I just wanted to offer some advice because we have similar conversations around policies versus procedures. I would just recommend that some of these things, well, this is really good work that you all did, that I would consider implementing procedure rather than policy. Policy binds you in a different way than procedures do and gives less flexibility for changing times. So just wanted to throw that out there. And I agree with Andy that many of these things, you know, just being mindful of purview of a board and managing, you know, board oversight of fiscal responsibilities versus curricular and or programmatic things. So thank you. I'm a parent also of BUHS students. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Tara Castine.
Hi, thanks. Tara Castine Putney. One of the things I know from attending a few of the meetings was equity of access to sports. And I know this is very in-depth into BUHS. And as you look at this further for the middle school students, I would like to see how outlying schools like Putney and Dummerston and Guilford have access to the BAM's sports and programs that they have going on. As a parent of a middle schooler, I hear nothing about opportunities for my son to play anything but sports, which is not a huge thing in Putney, and or other activities. And I would be really interested in making sure that we delve into those options for students moving forward.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other comments or questions for the Performance and Programmatic Equity Committee? Okay, we will move along to the Climate Crisis Task Force.
Thank you.
Thomas, are you If you need, the screen is available if you need to use it.
Yeah, we're gonna go over the policy proposal.
Okay.
So if you want to give me access. Where is it? That's it.
There we go.
You see it? Good.
Great.
All right. So just to give you background, the board was, when we became a merged board, we were given the mandate to create a climate crisis task force to look into what the district was doing as far as the climate crisis and what we could do going forward. So about a year ago, we started meeting as a task force to see where we were, how we were teaching climate crisis, what we were doing as far as purchasing and procurement and facilities management, and what we felt was the next step to address this as what we feel to be the biggest challenge of the 21st century that these children are going to have to grow up confronting, and that we want to treat it like the crisis it is and not merely a sustainable lifestyle choice or things of that type, to really have a bold and new vision about how to address the climate crisis. So what we did is I'm not going to read the entire 9-page document, but we have 1.5-page policy proposal, which will be a similar sort of thing to what we just saw in the previous the previous thing with the last committee, where we're showing a policy proposal that maybe needs to go to be put into proper format for a policy, and then 13 points that we found to be what we found to be the best way of implementing this proposal. So I'll read from the beginning. In response to a very real and growing crisis resulting from human-induced climate change, the Windham Southeast Supervisory District seeks to use the resources available to it to mitigate and eventually contribute toward an end to this emerging crisis. In this, our first stage, we begin with our plan to eliminate the district's contributions to climate change, and that actually should say reduce. The long-term aspiration is to engage in sustainable and regenerative practices in such a way as to assist in the reversal or mitigation of human impacts on climate. Additionally, we aim to work with the community and students to move beyond parochial effects. We are at a late stage in the crisis, a stage in which we can no longer afford to act alone. Most of the grief to come is the result of human impact that happens well beyond Brattleboro. Sustainability means using, developing, and protecting resources in a manner that enables people to meet their current needs and provides for future generations so they can also meet their needs from the joint perspective of environmental, economic, and community objectives. That said, the Earth's natural systems are so out of balance, so degraded, that sustainability is not enough. We must focus on a proactive approach beyond sustainability. Our ecosystems need regeneration to restore balance to the carbon and water cycles, which will ultimately help cool the planet. This involves the restoration of degraded ecosystems as well as reducing consumption. We are at a point where sustainability is essential to maintain the status quo, but in order to reverse the effects of environmental degradation, we must restore and regenerate. So our proposal is this. The Windham Southeast School District will strive to conduct its operations and make decisions that combat climate change by minimizing negative environmental impacts while protecting current and future human health and well-being. Principles of sustainability and regeneration will be a framework for decision-making. The Windham Southeast School District will demonstrate responsible leadership by making decisions and conducting operations with the following priorities in mind. Priority 1, educate and prepare our students for the future. The district will provide a high-quality education that supports concepts and practices of environmental restoration, social responsibility, and sustainability, preparing students for the crisis they will grow up in. Curricula will be revised so that the climate crisis and solutions are central themes at every level, and students will be engaged in real-time, real-world problem-solving activism. Priority 2, significantly reduce consumption. The current climate crisis is the result of extreme, pervasive consumption of fossil fuels, animals, and a variety of other natural resources. Destructive agricultural practices and prioritizing profit over the health of ecosystems has contributed immensely to the crisis. A societal policy of economic and material growth has put our survival in jeopardy. While sustainable consumption will help slow the climate crisis, only a drastic reduction in overall consumption will confront this crisis in a meaningful way and save our planet for future generations. The district recognizes this reality and adopts a policy of significant reduction in consumption across the board. Priority 3, protect students, staff, and our community from environmental harm. The district will eliminate the use of potentially toxic and harmful substances. Priority 4, preserve, preserve and regenerate current and future resources. The district will adopt practices in operations that balance environmental and social responsibility to protect and enhance the future quality of life. And finally, priority 5, continual review of implementation. The WSESD Climate Crisis Task Force will meet monthly to review the progress on these goals, with a progress report due to the full board at least once every year. And finally, in order to achieve the aims of this climate crisis policy, the board will incorporate sustainable goals into future strategic plans and direct the superintendent and business administrator to develop additional policies, practices, and procedures that create a legacy of leadership in sustainability, regeneration, and restoration across all district schools, including instruction, food, operations, construction, facilities, land use, energy conservation, and environmental integrity. So that is the broad policy that we're proposing. And after our research and debate within the task force, these are the 13 points that we thought were useful or effective methods for implementing this policy. I won't read every part of it, just the main part. So part 1, procurement of services and goods. Give greater weight to a purchase's climate ecological cost than its economic cost. Food. Significantly increase the frequency and promotion of plant-based proteins to minimize the use of animal products by the end of the school year, with the intention of transitioning to school meals that consist of whole food plant-based ingredients that are grown in healthy living soils on regenerative, mainly local organic farms. 3, education in the curriculum. Create a generation of conscious stewards of our planet. And some of these points are pragmatic, some of them are more philosophical. 4, food waste and lawn trimmings. Divert organic material from landfills. Compost all food waste and lawn trimmings from athletic fields, transforming them into rich soil additives. Set up on-site composting systems managed by the students. And then there's some more details. Paper and printing. Encourage all schools to go paperless. Purchase only 100% recycled paper. Staff are expected to use double-sided printing where possible. Like I said, some are just very pragmatic, some are more of a vision. Recyclables. Ending single-use plastics containers and non-recyclable materials. And there's a caveat in there that during what we're going through right now, sometimes single-use plastics for water are necessary just for because of the pandemic. 7, transportation. Drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels in transportation. That's pretty straightforward. Facilities management and energy conservation. Progress towards having fully renewable resources for energy and heating by 2024. Soil and field management. Use only natural, organically managed soil and grass. 10, Rich Earth Institute. This is a project that it might be good if Tim speaks about this afterwards, that he looked into personally. Investigate this resource for possible implementation. I think we'll talk about this afterwards. 11, assessment of carbon footprint. Calculate the district's current carbon footprint, which is not easy, but that's something that we absolutely need to know. 12, green committees. Create committees among the student population. And finally, a consumption mindset. Adopt a mindset of drastically reduced consumption, not merely sustainable consumption. That's what we found. There's a lot of other details that we found to be useful in implementing this proposal if it's approved. If anyone has any questions specifically about the project that Tim was working on, the Green Earth Institute, where is it? Rich Earth Institute, I'm sorry. He can talk about that.
No, it's just a clarification question. So the beginning, the first part, is the broad policy recommendation to the policy proposal.
This is what we are proposing as a policy. This part, sorry, and this part, sorry, pages 2 and 3. Page 1 is moreover an introduction as to why we're doing this, similar to what I said at the beginning.
Right. And then all the methods for implementation and the
13 points.
The 13 points. Yeah, those are suggested methods or good ideas or best practices, or I'm just trying to figure out
ways that our research found would work to implement these goals,
right,
or this policy.
Okay, great. So the policy part is at the top. So first, just in general, for people that weren't here when we started the meeting, typically with any topic, we have a presentation and proposal, and then the board, we have questions from the board, and then we open it to public comment. And also after this, at the end of the meeting, there's always a public comment on non-agenda items if there's something specific you want to ask about. So to begin with, questions from the board, please. Kelly Young and then Sean Murphy.
So I want to say, first of all, that I really like the composting idea, and I think that's I look forward to seeing how that's going to be planned and played out. So, but I do have two concerns, and I'm hoping that maybe you can address those. One of them is I'm looking at the number 2, food, and you mentioned going to a less of a, like, promoting plant-based proteins, and I just want to make sure that we're not going to be preventing or restricting students or staff, administration, I suppose, who may be not, who may be people who eat meat. And I just want to make sure that we're not putting any restrictions in there that would prevent that sort of diet for people who do eat meat. And I do appreciate the promoting the plant-based proteins, but I want to make sure that that other part isn't a restriction. But the other part, when you're talking about the composting, and maybe there were a couple other parts in there that kind of, I made this connection, and we haven't finished with the fields and the where certain sports are going to be, or that sort of thing, or what we're going to do with fields, etc. We're sort of in the process, and then we were kind of cut off due to the pandemic and just different things happening. And I assume that at some point we're going to be swinging back around to that. And I want to make sure that there's nothing in here that is going to be in conflict with whatever decision ends up being made about the sports fields, and what type of are we going to get turf, are we not going to get turf, or whatever. I just want to make sure that we're not restricting ourselves if we determine that one thing is better than another.
Yeah, so there's 2 points. We'll start off with the food. So climate change is brought about by carbon dioxide emissions or emissions, not just also methane. The two biggest overwhelming sources of that are fossil fuels and animal agriculture. That's what causes it. So the question is how much we want to address this challenge, climate change. That's how much we're going to adapt this recommendation. So however close we do to this is how close we are working towards fighting the crisis. It is the source. So how much we're going to reduce or prevent the source is how much we are going to fight this crisis.
Thomas, I don't want to cut the line, but I do have kind of an answer for Kelly or information about the food that I'd love to bring up now, if you don't mind.
Go for it. Yeah.
Well, I just
And then
wanted
we'll
to
talk about the field part.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk quickly in a practical sense about how it would actually go down with the company that does our food services, because they offer many different meals, but they always have one that is like the featured meal of the day. So what I believe would happen, and having worked with them, it would be a change in the menu planning that comes from up above, and I know that Allie West does, so that we are featuring more, because most of the meals that are like the main meal right now are all animal-based proteins, and very rarely do you get one that's not. So it would be just like a change in the offerings, but I can't imagine that the plan would be to not have any meat-based offerings. Like right now, it's tipped the other way, like it's so overwhelmingly meat-based, but we always have something to offer people that don't eat meat. So I think that the idea would be to just shift that. More offerings of plant-based, but have things, that we can offer to the people that are going to choose to just continue to eat meat every day. So like a shift of the entire thing, but I can't imagine that Cafe Services is not going to do that. They're not going to just restrict and say, no, you can't get any meat. I don't think that it's in their purview, and I don't think people would suffer over it. I think they would offer delicious food that everybody would still like and be comfortable with. Thanks for letting me cut the line.
Like I said, it all depends on how committed we are to this crisis. Similar to maybe are cars still going to be used? I think we're still going to use cars. Cars are the source of the problem. Animal agriculture is also the source of the problem. So it's a question of how committed we are to fighting it. Now, as for the field, we are recommending in this only organic, natural soil and turf to be used. If we are committed to fighting the climate crisis, we have to be committed to that.
Sean?
Thank you. I would have to say that I really do agree with what Kelly said. It's what I've gone through this, whatever it is, very carefully, and I kind of question whether it is the school board's mandate to recommend dietary changes. And then in the bigger picture, I'm wondering what the definition of this is. Is it a policy?
It's a policy
is it a
proposal.
manifesto? Is it a recommendation?
It says right here, policy proposal.
And if it is a policy proposal, then it would have to be vetted originally from the Policy and Amendment Committee, brought to the board as a policy, and then it would have 3 readings, and then it would be voted on after the 3rd reading. So it would not be something that was adopted initially. It isn't really set up specifically as the policies in the policy manual now. There's a lot of extraneous information that is a little bit different than policy. So I don't understand really how it could be adopted as a policy.
Like I said at the beginning, this is our proposal to the board, and any sort of formatting or change that has to be done to make it a proper policy, whatever specifically needs to be done to it, that would be the next step.
Yep.
And our
Also-
research over the past year is what brought up the 13 points of how we would implement something like this that is bold and isn't minor. This is supposed to be something that's a policy to change a mindset, to fight an existential crisis. The children who we're educating, this is going to be the focus of the world they grow up in. So we have to treat it as something that is life or death, not something that's a lifestyle choice. That's the plan.
And just to clarify to Thomas, the first 2 pages, well, page 2 and 3, because there's the introduction, but the first 2 pages are the policy, Sean, and it talks about educating and preparing students for the future. I don't think there's a lot of controversy about that. Significantly reduce consumption, preserve and regenerate current and future resources, and review our implementation. Those are not reduce consumption. I think I skipped over. Those are really not. They're not directives like you shall not eat meat or you shall not. They're not the things that come after that are things that the committee discussed and researched, and their recommendations and approaches that we would consider. But what they're recommending to become a policy is those first 2 pages. And I think it's important that we focus on that. We could talk a long time about whether it's good to eat meat or not, health-wise, or whether that's the board's responsibility or not. I don't think that that's really the intention of the proposal or the committee's work. I think the purposes, as Thomas said, is to clearly articulate that this community, that in the view of this community that we represent, these are important priorities, and these are things that we want to see a focus on, and improvements and changes in areas that we think are important for us to do our part, as little as it may affect the entire planet, that we would be doing our part in showing our students and our families and our community that we recognize the importance of this.
Well, part of this is
so if we get bogged down in the details, it really takes away from the larger question: is does this represent what our community's values?
So part of this is not just specific purchasing or things like that. 2 other important parts of this is we're setting an example for our students as to what is important to our community and what we think they need to be prepared for in their future. And also, in a broader sense, what we commit to as a district can have an effect to other districts in Vermont and further. It helps other districts become more bold in this crisis. So there's the practical aspect of it, and then it's also a more societal aspect.
Great. Thank you. Emily, and then Kelly.
So first, thank you, Thomas and committee. This is a lot of work, and I really appreciated getting in my inbox and then reviewing it. It's really just a great job. My question was regarding, okay, so let's say this page 2 and 3, the school board said, okay, we'd like to send this over to policy to get redrafted and formalized so that it could be something that's voted on. How would I'd hate to see the recommendations, some of them might never be implemented. Some of them the district might choose to take on. It's kind of beyond us. They're just recommendations, but I guess I wonder, how do those live on if the policies are what's voted upon?
So part of this is the task force was not merely formed to create one policy. It was created to investigate the district, see where we are, and make recommendations as to how we would change, as well as make a policy. So where we put them, I'm not sure. It depends on how the administration would want to proceed with that. But we were tasked with investigating and coming up with recommendations, and that's what those are. The policy, whatever format we need to put it in to make it, formal policy, that would go from here.
Thomas, Emily, just one more clarification. The Climate Crisis Task Force is not a creation of the board. It was created at the annual meeting, the founding meeting of the district, from the floor of the annual meeting. It came from the annual meeting, so it's not a board. It's not a board.
I don't think it actually did because I remember.
No, it did.
posting-
It was a
No,
motion. It was a
there was a
motion at the
motion
end
to
of-
keep it on the agenda. There was a motion to keep it climate crisis.
Oh, reports on the agenda. Yeah.
And then I proposed making the committee.
Right. Okay.
So
Right.
I remember that back in the day, but I mean,
misremembered them too.
I don't think it really matters either way, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, I'm also asking selfishly for the PPEC committee, because I'm just wondering, like, how do recommendations live on if the board's purview is to make policy? Because I think you put so much, your committee, so much work into these recommendations, the 13 points, and I guess, do they come as an addendum to policy that like how has it worked in the past? I mean, maybe somebody who's had longer standing on the board than I.
Well, I've had less, but my assumption was
Okay,
that
or
it
just
went into the
ideas.
policy, or I'm not sure. That's what we don't really know. The policy is what we know would be formalized. The recommendations, I would hope, would be an addendum somewhere, or would be recommendations from a board. I don't know. I don't think this is a unique situation for ours or yours.
Yep. And recommendations aren't directives.
So they could still be voted upon, but maybe the policy would be voted upon separately in the recommendations, and then they would just be handed over.
I think we'll have to explore that. I don't really know formally what the process would be. And you're right. I was thinking of the motion to have it on the agenda at every meeting. The task force was a different process. Thank you.
Could I say something?
No, Sean, please wait your turn.
You guys have all been talking at will, so
No, I've been calling on people as the hands come up, and I'm calling on people that haven't spoken first. And now I'm back to Kelly and then you.
So I kind of want to piggyback on what Emily was saying. From what it sounded like to me. So my question is, if I have concerns about the methods for implementation or any of the details in it, where and when would be the appropriate place in this procedure that those would be addressed? I mean, I don't want to. I would want to address things when it's most appropriate. So, at what point would we wait until a policy came back from the policy committee and then we would address it, or?
My assumption.
My question.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. My assumption was that we wouldn't want to even send it to the policy committee unless we agreed with it. So I think I wanted us to discuss this first and see if we wanted to push this forward. As of right now, the 13 points are recommendations from the Climate Crisis Task Force, not from the board. If we agreed with them, they would be recommendations from the board.
But Kelly, more
based on our
broadly,
year of research and our debate on our research and debate among the task force about what to do.
Yeah, Kelly, I think consulting with the committee would probably be the place to start. Sean?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a clarifying point. The Climate Crisis Task Force was, it was at the meeting, but it was non-binding because it was other business to come before the meeting. So the meeting had already been adjourned, and then it was brought forward, and it was voted on and it passed, but it was a non-binding resolution at that point. And then that's one item that I'd like to mention. And the other is reading through not the policy, but the method of implementation. And it's my understanding that there would be significant financial implication to these to this method of implementation. An example of that, I know that you didn't want to talk about that too much, David, but the example was the leads, using only leads building in building. And it was made very clear to us in the Academy project that in order to acquire a LEEDS certification, it would, the bottom line of the project could go up a tremendous amount of percentage. You could do the same building and not go for the LEEDS certification. So I question a lot, but they are in the implementation mostly. I question them on a financial basis, putting alternative heating sources in all buses, making urinals acceptable for saving urine. These are all big ticket items. And so I'm really wondering about the wisdom of voting on this until we know all the financial implications.
So I'd like to address that first. Regarding the LEED certification, we specifically put in there LEED certification standards because we debated about, oh, well, we would have to, if we don't put in standards, we would have to pay for the actual certification, which might not be worthwhile, which might be a waste of money. That's why we specifically put that in there. So meeting the standards, not necessarily paying for the certificate. We addressed that, yeah. And then as for the costs, that's the whole point of part one, that we're saying we're aware that to fight this crisis, it will cost more money. We're saying that that's what we believe in. And this comes up often when people talk about climate crisis. We're either going to pay something now, or we're going to pay much more in the future. This is a question of when we're going to pay for it. Do we want to do it now for this much or later for this much? So we're saying we recognize that this is a crisis that's going to be very inconvenient and expensive. Do we do it now or do we do it later for more, with more damage and more cost, significantly more cost?
Thank you, Thomas. Liz, and then Tim.
So we're basically talking two separate parts here, and at least as far as I can see. So the policy, what you have to put in policy seems pretty non-controversial to me. It seems like people's opinions and ideas have more to do with methods for implementation, but that wouldn't be in policy, right?
Correct.
Right. So
this is what the task force has found to be effective.
Right. So what you would like from the board is to, okay, this being the policy part being put into policy. The methods, I think we could talk for many, many hours about the methods and maybe not even reach an agreement. But if we have the policy there to guide us, that seems like a sensible thing to do. I think it's hard for people to grasp what's coming down in the future for kids. And it's maybe inconvenient for people now, but I get it. I'm not going to be around to see what comes down, 20, 30 years from now, but I want a better world for children, all the children, and by adopting policy, we can be influencing other districts to also come up with policies. And I think that's really important to do. I don't have any objections to your implementations, but that's where we're seeming to get hung up right now. The implementations don't go in the policy.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Tim, and then Michelle.
Well, I don't want to get.
They are there to be thought to be taken in and considered strongly. They're from our research and our debate.
Tim?
I think most of us want to eliminate water pollution and support sustainable farming. The Rich Earth Institute recycles urine into fertilizer and just does just that. It eliminates water pollution and supports sustainable farming. Sean, you mentioned that it might be very expensive. I think you would be very surprised to learn that it's not at all. It would be a small investment, and symbolically, it would be a major statement. Brattleboro School would be the first in the nation to divert urine to fertilizer. That would be making the kind of bold statement that reflects our values and our concern for the environment. I think it has pragmatic value, and it has powerful symbolic, it's sending a powerful symbolic message about what we value. So that's why part of the implementation is simply investigate. Just investigate the Rich Earth Institute and what they can bring to our schools and our students in education, and pragmatically to the environment, reducing water pollution and producing good fertilizer.
And I just want to bring up this one point regarding cost. This is a recurring concern that people have about addressing climate change or the climate crisis, is the cost today. Decade after decade after decade, we've said, well, this is an economic disruption. We can't do it. So then the next decade, the price is doubled. The effects have doubled. I forget the exact years, but I believe it was between 1990 and now. Even though we've become more aware of the problem, global emissions, I believe, have gone up 60%. Because people have been putting economic concerns before existential concerns. So what we're saying here, putting it as number one, is saying the financial cost does not determine our decision on something that affects the climate. That's the point.
Thank you, Thomas. Michelle, and then Kelly.
Yeah, thank you for this. By the way, I loved reading it too, and it makes me proud of Vermont and this district. It's wonderful, all the work you guys did. But I just wanted to say, I guess, that when I focus on these top 5 priorities, I don't think there's a question that this represents our collective community values. And I agree with Liz that I think if there was a policy in place, it would help guide how to actually implement the methods of implementation. And I would hope that I would actually love to see the board be able to look at each of these one at a time carefully and have discussion and find realistic ways to make these happen and to implement them. And I don't know, I guess I'm getting a little bit lost on where these recommendations go once we vote or whatever. I do think there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had and things that could be fine-tuned when we look at it collectively. But as for the top 5 priorities, I mean, I feel like this is what Vermont is known for, and this is what our community wants. And I think the community would be very supportive of this being a priority in our school district.
I would like to say that priority 2 is actually fairly controversial in reality. We live in a society that is based on economic expansion, which means increased consumption. So this is going against, at least that part, is the part that's hard for people. And it's the part that our society talks about, but does the opposite. So it is actually controversial, I think. But I think we should do it. I think we need to change that, or we change nothing.
Kelly, and then Sean.
So I am also concerned with, let me just back up here and say, I don't have an issue with this going to the policy committee for them to come up with a policy to propose to the board. I think that actually would be a very good idea. But I have concerns about the wording of the give greater weight, because let's not forget where we are. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of an economy that people are out of work. Some people are on unemployment, some people aren't, some people got the extra money, some people didn't, some people are able to go back to their jobs, some people aren't. It wasn't that long ago that we were concerned about budgets, and I'm sure that we're always concerned about budgets, but concerned about budgets and how can we cut here and how can we cut there. And I think it's always important to be fiscally responsible, always. And I think it's always important to be paying attention to our climate and how our things are the potential effects. But my concern about that one is that it's binding, and I'm concerned about the economy and how this is going to potentially bind us, and we may get ourselves into a position, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but if this is something that's going to be a policy and it's going to be implemented for many years to come, which it sounds like that's the ultimate goal, how are we going to bind people in the future, and we're going to restrict them, and I have serious concerns about that.
Yeah, that's the difficult situation we're always in. That's why this is a perennial problem, where we're constantly told that we have to, here we are in a recession. We're in the third recession of the century already. And it doesn't look like recessions are going to stop. And it doesn't look like they're getting less severe than they were before. You look at 2008, you look at now, it's even worse. They're getting they're getting stronger, and they're getting more recurrent. This problem isn't going to wait until we figure out our economy, until we figure out how to make capitalism work without putting us in binds as far as budgets. So this issue is not going to go away. What we're saying is, are we going to sacrifice in order to prevent long-term, in the long term, much more difficult situations? If we don't address climate change, we are going to have much, much worse budgets in the future. We're going to have much less access to money if we have to deal with climate change disasters in increasing severity and recurrence. So it's not going away, and we're not going to come to a time when all of a sudden we have unlimited money to face it. There's always going to be this stress. We have to figure out now, what do we value more?
Sean, and then Emily.
Yeah, I was just wondering, once again, I would have to bring up the changes that this could possibly implement. Both my children went to Brattleboro Union High School after Guilford. They both got very interested in visiting foreign countries during their high school years. So I presume number 2 number 3 would eliminate foreign travel for students at Brattleboro Union High School. My daughter went to France twice. My son went to Costa Rica. And I'm thinking about all the wonderful trips that Dan Braden does with his environmental work with students. And if you followed this to the letter, nobody could ever get on an airplane again. I know that for a fact. My daughter lives in Australia. She can't come here, we can't go there because of the pandemic. But even if we did, and we've done it, it's extremely not carbon neutral at all. So I think this is a very laudable goal, actually. But if you think about all the ramifications, I think that we should think much more carefully than this 2 pages outlines before we implement it, because it would make a market change, which I know that you're asking for, but it would be a market change, and it would be asking the young people to make a sacrifice in their formative years, which we were never asked to make, forego travel, forego, you know, owning a car possibly, forego all kinds of things. And I'm not sure that I think that's a very good idea. In addition to which, it would also mean curriculum changes, as were very, very well stated by Matt in his letter to the board. And curriculum changes are really probably not the purview of the board. And if it also, if the introduction was left intact and was made part of the policy, I was thinking of how would an elementary student look at this introduction? What would be the outcome? And it would be fear. So if you want to start to have students more aware, and you're starting at an elementary level, and you're instituting a scary idea, which is what I did when I was in school. The nuclear holocaust was very much a part of my going to school. I had to hide underneath the desk. Terrified me, terrified me. And could I learn when I was terrified? No, nobody can. So I have, as I said, it's a laudable goal, but I have extreme reservations on how the climate crisis task force is presenting this problem. Thank you.
I understand. Yes, we've talked about that before. Now, my issue, my point of view, isn't so much that I'm afraid of children being afraid of climate crisis. I'm personally concerned about wishful thinking or people looking for hope as a goal. Affecting change is what we have to look for as a goal, not worrying about whether or not people are afraid of an existential crisis. How can you not be afraid of an existential crisis? Maybe like what you're talking about, ducking cover in the 50s and 60s. Well, there was a good reason for that. It came close. We have to tell our children that this is a very serious thing, and I believe, as do many other people, that this is the challenge of their lives in this century. So, yes, we can soften it to younger children, but we also have to bring this as not merely a lifestyle choice or a lifestyle change, but as addressing a life or death situation, which it is. As for travel and whether or not it's fair, it's not fair. Previous generations have consumed what my generation, let alone my son's, and if he has sons, generation, could have had. We're at this position now not because it's fair, and we don't get out of it by doing what's fair. I'd like to just, I didn't want to read all of this, but the last part, the consumption mindset, wraps up the idea that we were trying to get. While consumption through renewable means is a significant advance from the status quo, the source of climate change is human consumption of the natural world. Significantly reducing our consumption of energy, animals, and natural resources in a world undergoing this unique and historic crisis is the solution. This requires not only creativity in facing reality, but also shifting our mindset from consumption to a different outlook on life, on embracing conservation, restoration, and regeneration. Ultimately, it requires sacrifice. That's the point. We don't get out of this without sacrifice. And the sooner that we can come to that point of view, the sooner we can actually get something accomplished. Because people have been concerned about this since before I was born. The situation's worse now.
Michelle and then Emily.
Yeah, just listening to Sean and Thomas go back and forth, it sounds like we're having a conversation that's all or nothing. And I think that's the worst way we could perceive this. I think adopting intentions and creating policy that is an intention shouldn't. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm new and I don't know enough about how policies and work. But it just sounds like we're having an all or nothing conversation. And I would hate to see us dismiss valuable changes because it's, you know, it's across the board. It takes away student travel and things like that. When I was in Ohio, we tried to create a recycling program at my child's school. It was her idea. We offered to do all the work because they recycled nothing, just collect paper. And the school board shot it down because they said, no, we'd have to do it through the whole district, and we can't. So we couldn't recycle because it was all or nothing. And so I hope that the board can collectively be looking at this. And again, it sounds like these implementation methods there's much room for discussion and figuring out how to actually apply them. But I do think that we need to make it a priority to set a good intention that this is our goal, to be shifting in the right direction and being responsible consumers and doing what we can as a school district. Schools are huge consumers, and doing what we can to do our fair part in protecting our earth and our environment.
Thanks, Michelle. I just want to remind the patient members of the public who, I'm glad you don't have to hold your actual hand up, but I do see the hands, and I will be calling on you as soon as the board runs out of questions, or if we get repetitive.
I just wanted to reiterate one thing in relation to that. This is what we found. This is what we recommend. Like I said before, how much we want to address this crisis is how much we will implement this. Do we want to go 100% against this, or do we want to go 70, 50? That's what the board's decision is. This is what we've said is the best way of implementing this goal. If the board says we only want to do 70, that's what the board decides, but we have to make that consciously as a decision.
Emily?
I'd like to make a motion that we send this document and the policy recommendations over to the policy committee for review and then an adjustment to repropose to the board.
I second that.
So we have a motion to refer the policy to the policy committee, policy and amendment committee, to make a recommendation to the board. Is that what you're asking, Emily? Is that what you said?
Yep, to repropose the policy to the board.
To propose a policy to the board. Okay, and moved by Emily, seconded by Michelle. Was that Michelle? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we have a motion. Anyone would like to speak to the motion? Sean? This is to the motion now.
In my experience, most of the policies that we have adopted, except for the local board policies, have been vetted by another group. So I'm wondering how the policy committee, the policy and amendment committee, would actually turn this into a policy that would be acceptable to the policy manual.
Kelly?
So it's still not clear to me. So the implementations that were suggested, those wouldn't go with the policy to the policy committee, correct?
Those are a separate report on our findings, our research over the past year. So it's separate from the policy.
So if the policy committee took this upon themselves to prepare a proposed policy, it would come back to the board, we would discuss, and it would have 3 readings, correct? That's what Sean mentioned?
Well, I'm not sure the 3 readings is actually required, but we would take it through the typical process, whatever.
Okay,
that is.
I seem to recall that it was that there was a requirement, but at least 2 or 3 readings. That was my understanding, but okay. All right, thank you.
Let's see. Anne?
Yes, Dave?
Yes.
No, all I was going to say is 3 readings is indeed a requirement by state statute.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members' comments on the motion? Okay, public comments. Well, first, Andy, you had a comment I'd like to hear?
I'm going to stop sharing just so we can see people.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, when I look at some of the things, I think, you know, some of the items from pages 2 and 3 that are at enumerated pages 2 and 3, we're already doing some of those items, and we're also bound by state statute. You know, item 1 in terms of curriculum, we're bound by VSA or 16 VSA 165 to teach the adopted state standards. In this case, it would happen to be the next gen science standards, which do have a robust connection to climate change. So as we kind of filter down, it might be helpful to winnow down the number of items that are being voted upon to move forward. Since climate change is already embedded in those items, I'm not sure with the other items how you are going to monitor some of those other items. It might be helpful to hear from Frank also about some of the other aspects that fiscally are already being taken on to reduce consumption in different areas, as well as reducing things like our tipping fees in terms of composting and other items, and trying to reduce waste in the schools. So I'm not sure what policy kind of runs into this in terms of whether it's policy or whether it's management of the schools, and how we're trying to, you know, adopting procedure in managing the schools.
Thank you. Marilyn Chiarello?
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. I guess I could start my video. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to address the fear issue that was brought up earlier. Teaching kids, especially elementary school kids, about the joys of nature and the regenerative power of nature is a way of addressing climate change with hope as opposed to fear. So I know that our teachers here are creative and can come up with ways of presenting curriculum or lessons to promote hope. That, you know, I've been seeking out a lot of resources recently as you know, being a part of this committee. And there are some amazing videos, amazing resources for young children and middle school children and high school children, and they can be engaged in citizen science and really being a part of the solution. And I understand that the constraints of statewide curriculum and mandates and standards and so on. I'm a former teacher myself. I had to live within those parameters, but there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of ways of incorporating the joy of nature and being a part of a solution into a curriculum. And it could go across the board. It could be part of your geography lessons. It could be part of your math lessons, your language arts. It could go across the board. So having a common theme, looking at a crisis that is the biggest crisis humans have ever faced on this planet, I don't think that's a big ask.
Thanks, Marilyn. Scott Noren? You'll need to unmute.
Thank you.
Scott.
I'm Scott Noren. I just did. I have
Great,
the
go ahead.
links. I have satellite
Go ahead.
internet.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I'm Scott Noren. I'm the president of the Windham Southeast Education Association. I'm also a 22-year veteran of the WHS Science Department. And first, I'd like to say I applaud the board for investigating, possible policies that deal with the multifaceted issues of global climate change. It definitely is, going to impact all of our lives, currently and into, the future. WSEA, the administration, the board in this district have decades of cooperation on issues that concern us all. And one of those issues is curriculum. And specifically in the Certified Staff Master Agreement, there's an article that has to do with curriculum, and that is Article 4.7, which I'd like to mention to you. And it reads, inasmuch as the cumulative experience and judgment of the teachers who are members of the association can contribute to sound decisions in the public interest, the board will make every effort to involve the teachers through the association in the development of educational policy. Now, how that has been interpreted in the past is that the board would bring, something to the administration, the superintendent, and then the superintendent would bring it to us, and then we would work together, to address the issue, So, WSEA, the certified and support staff, definitely, would like to be, part of this process. Speaking as a science teacher, I can tell you that we currently do cover a lot of climate change and sustainability. Right? Our freshman earth science course, that is a common thread throughout the whole curriculum. And our biology course for sophomores, another required course. I teach a wildlife ecology and management course. That's the whole course, along with Mike Auerbach's environmental science, policy and planning. I also know that my colleagues at the middle school, spend a lot of time, in their 2-year, cycling of students, covering these issues. So my point is, we are already doing a lot of this. So I think maybe there just needs to be a little more clarity on what, we are already doing. As Andy mentioned, we are bound to, follow the next gen science standards, and the next gen science standards do contain rigorous, standards when it comes to climate change, sustainability, and responsible decision making. From a practical point, I'll also say that, implementing the next gen science standards over the last few years has required a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money. And in the current COVID era, the staff just don't have, that time right now. I mean, to be honest, the staff are overwhelmed. I think the article in the Reformer today from the West River School District, where Superintendent Anton and Principal Theobald of Leland Gray were speaking about how their staff are overwhelmed. It's definitely true. Everyone is already very tired, and I am worried about, my membership, becoming fatigued and exhausted. So I would hope you would keep that in mind too. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Dan Cornelier.
Hello, thank you. Dan Cornelia, Oak Grove School. I just have a question about the decision to choose organic food over conventional, because in it they talk about how there's sound science, and there's a lot of sound science showing that organic food is not better for you. It's actually many times worse for the environment than conventional farming, and yields are also generally lower than conventional farming. So I'm just confused why organic was chosen, and I'm hoping for some clarification on that.
I'm going to ask Thomas not to respond to that, because it's not relevant to the motion right now. But thank you for the comment. Allie West.
Hi, I'm Allie West. I'm the Regional Food Service Director for the Brattleboro area, from Dummerston all the way down to Vernon. And I wanted to speak up tonight just to speak about changing the menus for students. Right now, we are currently offering a vegetarian and a vegan version of any hot entree at all of the elementary schools, the high school, and the middle school. So those are things that we're already doing to create a more plant-based environment. That being said, I went to one of these meetings and we did discuss not changing. We don't want to ever change things so that it's making another student. I know one person brought up, well, are you going to take away meat completely? And no, we won't. That's not an option. Doing anything that is, I'm trying to say this correctly, and I'm not good at public speaking, so bear with me for a minute. We as the food service company and as the provider of nourishment to our children, we want to give them the most nourishing meals we can, but we also, at the end of the day, our most important thing is feeding the kids. So taking away a cheeseburger, which I know a child's going to eat, and saying, here's this amazingly delicious roasted portobello mushroom, which is really tasty, but the kid's not going to eat it. At the end of the day, that kid's going to go home hungry, and that's not what our goal is. So we want to make as many accommodations as we can, but we still need to feed the kids. That was basically why I waited this long to talk, because I really want to make that point clear.
Thank you, Ally. Beth Bristol?
Yes, thank you. My comment is more of an observation. I'm noticing a common thread through many of the discussions tonight seems to be around confusion as to the roles and the responsibilities of the school board, and where your authority lies versus another entity. And as a former school board chair, I know that the Vermont School Board Association offered some really great resources that helped to guide us in our discussions, make things more effective, focus our direction and our discussion a bit more efficiently. And maybe a recommendation or suggestion would be to look into having some type of a presentation in that regard to assist you.
Thanks, Beth. Frank Rucker?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to respond to Andy. Andy made a reference and also echo what Scott said and so many others. You know, I also applaud the board and the committee for all the hard work that they've done, and I think we are in this together. And that's my comment is just a quick overview of when the committee does, if the vote sends this to policy development, that, you know, as others have said, you know, so important to look at what we've already put in place so that we don't create conflicts or maybe deleverage the investments that we've made. So just for example, very quickly, as we think about things like in references to things in the document around heat pumps and that sort of thing, we want to just keep in mind that in the last 10 years, we have well over $3 million worth of investments that are very much in line with what the committee's proposing. But I would hate to see that the engineering standards and some of the design parameters being essentially ignored when you're considering the policy, because then we won't leverage the investment. We'll actually you know, go further away from our objective. But things like, as you know, we've cut our fossil fuel consumption in half just since I've been in the system since 2014. You know, we've got the Green Street building, we've got Academy, we've got the high school is the main system. We got Putney and Guilford all on biofuel, and those were all recent conversions away from fossil fuel. And then, you know, the board has scheduled an advance on the Dummerston plant, and that'll just leave the Oak Grove plant, our smallest school, as not currently on a schedule to essentially eliminate the easiest and the highest cost component of you know, operating schools, which is the heat. The other aspect that's an enormous advance, and it's consistent with the task force you know, recommendations, is moving to the solar array. David, I know you were part of that early work with the Brattleboro town districts, and where we went to a net metering that was putting about 80,000 of electricity under a net metering solar array based purchase agreement. And then in 2017, we moved the rest of the systems to the Sky Solar solar array at Windham. Solid waste, we purchase about 1 megawatt of power out of that 5 megawatt field for our system. So just there's so many examples of really substantial progress, but it would be helpful, as others said, that we acknowledge the progress that has been made, and as the policy is considered, that it really leverages the investments and the training and the expertise that is in the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Stephanie Pike.
Hopefully you can hear me. My internet is not so good.
It's a little sketchy, but
I
we can hear
wonder
you.
School.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, we're not hearing you. Mary Beth Porter.
So I really appreciate this proposal.
Wasn't necessarily.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
She keeps
Okay.
it keeps dropping out.
So as I was saying, I really appreciate the proposal and the time and effort and consideration that went into it. One thing that occurs to me is, well, two things. We're asking for a systemic change, and that's always extremely hard to pull off, but we have to start with little steps. And one of those little steps that may have not been part of the proposal, but may in a revision be considered as part of the proposal, is for each member of the district, each building member of the district, Academy School, Green Street School, wherever, should have some way, some starting point. There should be some sort of a self-assessment tool that could be made available to schools so that they would have a starting point. And instead of just making changes and not measuring the growth that you're making as you implement changes, you get a little reward if you can measure the improvements that you make. And that reward may make for incentive to continue with improvement. And it is also really handy to have a way of measuring progress, so that a couple of people have mentioned other districts in the state and maybe even further away would be able to look at what progress we make and have a model for making their own changes. And that's it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, we have a motion on the floor to refer the second and third page of the proposal, the WSESD Climate Crisis Policy Proposal, to the Policy and Amendment Committee to develop and propose a policy to the board.
David, I have my hand up.
Yeah, I see. I just got 4 hands up as soon as I said, as soon as I started with the motion. So go ahead, Mark.
The cause is noble and I appreciate it. Frankly, when you receive the document and you read the document, it's one document. I don't see it as 2 separate documents. Thomas talked about investigating the school district. I've never been interviewed. I don't know if the committee has a true understanding of the work that has been done that Frank talked about. Honestly, when I read that section that says methods of implementation, I don't read that as recommendations. I read that as mandates, and it feels to be completely frank, it feels micromanaging to me.
Thank you. Sean?
Thank you. I would just like to reiterate what Mark just said. One of the things that I think was lacking in this, receiving this information, and actually I've been going to the Climate Crisis Task Force subcommittee meetings, but one of the things that had been missing until tonight is collaboration among the staff, the business part of the organization, all the people that have so much input, and all the things that have been implemented already were not recognized in this document. And since I've been a part of the school board for so long, I know that there has been real forward thinking changes that have been made. And I think that in retrospect, probably the one thing that's missing, that's the biggest part, the biggest concern for me, is the lack of collaboration with the other stakeholders. And so it does come across as a dictate and a mandate and a manifesto. And that being said, I just have reservations about it. They're much reduced by this, what we've just heard. All the input that we've just heard from all the stakeholders makes a huge difference to how I feel about it. And when I read it, I have to agree with Mark. The method and implementation, I believed was part and parcel to the whole thing, which is why I asked initially, what is this? Is this a policy? Is it a manifesto? Is it a mandate? So thank you.
Selena Romo?
Thank you for letting me speak. This is actually one of the reasons why I chose to participate tonight as a school board member from Marlboro, because not only, like, I philosophically agree with all of the work that was done for this, but I also have grave concerns around the implementation and the lack of collaboration that has happened with the building admin, with the teachers. They are teachers both in my district and in Brattleboro district work exceptionally hard, and they are really the experts in this, and there is already a lot of work that has happened. It also seems like, I believe somebody else spoke to it, I would highly, highly recommend seeking the support of the VSBA. The VSBA regularly looks for statewide recommendations for policy. This is perhaps more of a purview for that, where you could go to the VSBA representatives that are local. I know Dan MacArthur is one of them. He serves on my board. They solicit recommendations to take to the state board. I'm just trying to look over some of my notes here. I mean, I think we need to be mindful about, while a lot of these things are important, we also work as a board, we have a fiscal responsibility, speaking for, as myself as a board member, to, respond to the taxpayers and be mindful of what we're doing for our tax base. I learned that last night, for example, VSBIT is going to be a 9.8% increase in health benefits for next year. That's going to be a large thing that we need to address budget-wise. Like this kind of thing also affects us in Marlboro as far as like how we pay tuition for our high school students to attend BUHS. I just think we need to be mindful about who our community is and how they can actually function within it. I think we have a lot of folks that care deeply about this, but may not have deep pockets because, again, this is a public entity. Many of these things can be addressed in the private sector as well. So just want to reiterate that I think that using your VSBA resources for some help and guidance in these sorts of creating policy things is really important. And if you want to connect to your local rep to do some advocacy work at the state level, I can connect you to Dan MacArthur as well.
Thank you. Keith Lyman?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, David. Just wanted to, most of the things I want to talk about have already been spoken to, but I think there were at least 15 teachers from my school here this evening, and there are curricular implications in this, in the policy piece, specifically number one, that are pretty big. And I would just encourage the board to go through a process of including the teachers in that, taking a look at this. Matt Betts wrote a really passionate letter to the board, and I'm not sure if that is going to be read or shared, but it's really well. I think he represents a lot of teachers in his in his letter. Thanks.
Yeah, his letter has been posted on our website. Thank you. Christy Henderson?
Hi, Christy Henderson. I'm a science teacher at BAMS. And I want to understand the procedure for bringing policy changes to the board. It's very powerful, like as a teacher, to be able to charge your students to be participants in their local community. And it's just really not clear to me how a policy like this comes to this point without much public attention. And so I would really appreciate knowing where I can find out how to key my students in on these types of resources so that the learning that I am doing with my students is relevant and connected to their school community. Can you please speak to where how policies are brought to the board are published publicly so that we as teachers can use this venue to charge our students to be active participants in their learning?
I briefly can respond. First thing I'd encourage you to do is contact Thomas Nolan, the chair of the committee, because that's where this came from. And committees are a typical place where policies are developed. Sometimes there are interest groups or what's the right word for it? I guess interest groups are the special interest groups that have a policy they want, and they will present it or they will advance it to the board. And then the process is that the policy and amendment committee looks it over, tries to find, works with people who know how to draft policy and with the administration to develop a policy that then comes to the board. And Anne has instructed me that it has 3 public hearings and then we vote on it. So that's the process. So I would encourage you to contact Thomas. This process, obviously, this is not done. It's nowhere near done. And the committee will continue, I think, to work on all aspects of this. And we'll see whether the policy committee is going to take it up initially or not. All of the meetings are public. They are all on Zoom. They're all listed on our website, as are the agendas. And that's primarily the way that's communicated. Typically, we don't have issues that are this controversial or this generational or that bring on entire, comparing worldviews. So people don't pay attention and they don't know when these things are happening. And then when it comes up, we hear from people about, oh, gee, nobody asked us, we didn't get to talk about it, we didn't participate. That's why we have the 3 public hearings and such a long, careful process. And it all has to be done in public.
So this is the first of 3 public hearings concerning this policy?
No, we don't have a policy yet. This is the report from the committee asking the board to act on their policy proposal.
Thank you.
Yep. Kelly? I think you're muted still, Kelly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I wanted to say that I appreciate Mark and Selena and Sean's points. And if I did not express it before, I think it's great in theory, and I think it can be great in practice. But I'm not sure which speaker it was that mentioned that they were confused, maybe is the word, that the implementation was part of it, and it did seem like that was part of it. So that's part of my reservations, that is put there. I recognize that Thomas has said that this is part of their report to the board, but the way it looks like it's part of it. But I do appreciate the point of that. It seems like it's the implementation portion and maybe even the policy. I'm not sure, but seems a little micromanagey I think is the word that was used. And I would say that I have in the past referenced the role of the school board. And I think the role of the school board is not necessarily to tell, this is my understanding, is not necessarily to tell the administration how they're supposed to do things, but the administration is supposed to make certain decisions. And I want to be very careful about not stepping over the line. And I would be interested to find out where that line is. And maybe that's something that would be addressed tonight, maybe not. But I just wanted to bring that point up. Thank you.
Thomas?
Yeah, so I just wanted to address this thing that I've been hearing a few times about this being almost like a closed committee, or this was a task force that was specifically called a task force, not a committee, because it was open to the entire public, and the entire public was encouraged to be a part of this. And that's what happened. We have 2 people who are board members who are in the task force. The rest are not board members. We have people from the public. We have Paul Smith. We have a student. And we've collaborated with people outside of just the task force. We talked with Stephen Dodson in one of our meetings to get he's the sustainability coordinator for the town of Brattleboro. We brought him in to get him to give us his take on where we were, any ideas he had. And we've had warned meetings for about a year that we've encouraged, if not begged, the public and other people to attend. So this has been widely requested for outside input. So it doesn't really make any sense to me. Specifically, this is a task force to bring in other people aside from board members to do this collaboratively. And that's what we've done.
Tara Castine?
Hi, thanks, Tara Castine, yet again, sorry. I have to revoice some things some people have said. You know, I think that our schools in general are trying very hard to be conscientious of the environment and the changes that they are making to make our schools and our students understand their part in climate control. I know there are many things on that list that Putney Central School are doing, composting. They have a garden, which they use. We have a different food program than the other schools do, which does use locally sourced farms, goods, and encourages some very interesting eats. I know that for a fact, but one of the things I would like to say is that I think when you review this at the committee level for a policy is you definitely need goals that don't define a path to get there, so that the individual schools or departments can figure out a way to meet said goal of reducing or eliminating or doing these things. And it will be very interesting to watch what comes about after that policy review discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Betts?
Yes, thank you. In my letter, I wrote a lot of things, and I encourage people to read it. I don't want to be redundant on what I wrote in there. But as I'm listening tonight and hearing what everyone is saying, there's one thing that is extremely clear. It's been said to me in the past, and I didn't quite realize it until tonight. And what I'm realizing is that this proposal that you've come up with, Mr. Nolan, the 13 points, it exposes a tremendous disconnect between the board and what is going on, or at least your committee, and what is going on in reality in our schools. You say you did your research and you spoke with Paul Smith and other science teachers, and yet you do not mention one bit of the next generation science standards. You don't follow through with and looking at what we do in this district and how next gen is used. So I would dispute that. That I know you have an agenda, but you have to, and the board, all of you, when you're making policies, no matter what they are, you need to know our school, you need to know our children, and you need to know what our teachers are doing. You need to ask for information. You need to come into our classrooms and see what we're doing, the hard work we're doing, the work that we're very overwhelmed with right now. If you feed a child a portobello mushroom sandwich, they're going to go hungry. These are the kind of details that you would only know if you were in our school and observing what kind of things people eat from all different backgrounds, cultures, and classes in our community. All of these details are so important. School board, I'm begging you to please get to know us, get to know what our needs are. They may be a little bit different from an activist agenda, and we have to take little steps to do that. But it's very important. Otherwise, you're going to have a staff that's demoralized and unhappy, and that's it's really not where teachers need to be to do what we do best in our job. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Adams?
Yeah, two things. One is that Putney Central, as Tara mentioned, we have a completely different food program, and we have gardens, and the third graders are the class that they take around different foods from the gardens prepared in different ways, and they record the data about, you know, which kids liked it, didn't like it. A lot of times the kids don't know what it is that they're eating, but the food tastes at the school have broadened out over the years. So kids are now eating things, they're eating things now that they wouldn't have before all of this work took place. So that's something I'd like you to keep in mind. The second thing is that when this, if the board votes to send this to policy and amendment, that doesn't mean that we're not going to reach out to teachers, find out what the curriculum is. You know, it's going over there to be looked at. And I'm on that committee, and I would certainly want to know what's already happening, you know, in curriculum. But this is a starting point. What's below there is not part of the policy and amendment committee. And nobody's out to make teachers look bad. We do value our teachers. So, when I look at this, if the board does vote to send this to policy, those are things I'm going to be looking at. And one reason to have a policy is to hold future boards. Let's say 5 years from now, you get a board that says, oh, we don't like dealing with climate change. Well, then they're going to have to go and they're going to have to, you know, go through the policies, and it gives a little extra oomph and accountability for the board. So I think, you know, you all have been speaking from a Brattleboro perspective. I don't know what you serve in your meals. I just know that, you know, since my granddaughter, she's in 7th grade now, has been part of this whole farm to school program. We support local farmers. We have a cook, more than one, but kids are eating a much wider variety of foods now than they ever ate before. So, you know, it doesn't come down to just we're going to give them a portobello mushroom sandwich. I mean, it's more finesse than that. And it's about cultivating tastes in young children to help them make broader food choices. So I really would like to see the board send this to policy and amendment and have us go over it. And that doesn't mean we're not going to take our own deep dive into it, because I think that that's part of what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to point out that it's almost 9:30 and ask people to please address the motion. The motion is to send page 2 and 3, the policy proposal, to the Policy and Amendments Committee for review and to propose a policy to the board. Andy?
David, I just wanted to address Kelly's question of the distinction in the line. Under statute, the board can create policy, and that's their role, is to create educational policy. And under statutes, the superintendent's role to supervise this and operate the schools. And so this is where this is kind of in tricky grounds, because it would definitely impact the supervision and operation of things. And the extent to which this forms the function of educational policy. And some of the things it does, in other the aspects, it may kind of hedge on that a little bit.
Yeah, just one of the things that we went over very early in the beginning of this board was the policy, the power of school boards. And the line is not a defined line. There have been lots of attempts to define it. The statute also points out that the school board is to act as the legislative body of the municipality, basically to make the rules. And so it's the conversation about where the line is ongoing, and we're obviously going to be continuing it. Right now, we're talking about a policy. What comes out of policy and amendment, because it's a group of people with a lot of experience, will be a policy. It will not be management. So I just want to make that really clear. The line is not clear, but our intention in this motion is really clear. I think it would be disrespecting the people on the policy committee to not recognize that. Thomas.
I'll be brief. This point keeps coming up that people feel that we weren't acknowledging successes, and that I'm sorry that actually didn't get in the document. It's because when we did our initial assessment, we found things that we were doing incredibly well already. For instance, we had something we were looking into about what were the finances of the district being put into, and we found out that the people we were banking with, I believe, and David did the research on this, had divested from fossil fuels.
Yes.
We found out obviously that we're doing great with the pellet heating. And we found out when I started to talk to Paul about the curriculum that we had an incredible curriculum already. And I was actually very surprised by your letter, because my understanding and my sentiment behind this document is that we were giving, especially the science teachers, but everybody, carte blanche to do more and to keep doing what they were doing with the full support of the board. It didn't make any sense to me. And the rest of I think I can speak for the rest of the task force. This was the part that we thought was the least controversial, and we thought would be welcomed. So I was personally very happy to see what we were already doing when we first assessed that at the beginning. We weren't critiquing that not enough was being done. We were happy with it, and we were saying we wanted to increase that.
Thank you. Nancy?
Good evening. I will be very brief with my statement, but I have some real concerns about our most vulnerable population, which we've talked about a lot, as you've talked about a lot as a board, and we've talked a lot about as administrators. And one of the things Thomas stated was that when we looked at travel, we might have to look at the fact that our students won't get to travel. For our most vulnerable populations, who in most part suffer economically, Sometimes travel through school is the only way they see the world in person. We've talked a ton about respecting cultural diversity. We live in the whitest state in the union. We are not going to be teaching our students firsthand about cultural diversity if we are looking at policies that exempt them from experiencing the world they live in. And I have students at the Career Center who are juniors and seniors in high school who have never seen the ocean. We live 2 hours from the ocean, and yet they've never seen it. We need to look at how are we moving students forward? What is best for our students as a whole? And I completely love the idea of being green. I would love to say that we are going to be carbon neutral in everything that we do, but our world isn't there yet. And the fact that some of the things we look at as being carbon neutral aren't carbon neutral, nor are they best for the humanity of our world. If you look at the mining of mica for batteries for cars, that's not humane. That's putting a child who might be 5 or 6 in a hole, and asking them to dig all day or sort all day. That is not what we are looking at as humane greenness. And we have to look at the entire world when we're talking about this. So I hope when this goes to the policy committee, A, the research that you base your policy on will be cited, just like we would ask of our students. And B, that you look at the policy as a whole and look at the aspects that you're asking us to change and make sure the change is really what is best for our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I felt the need to just tell everyone who's spoken tonight how much I do respect, and I believe this board does too, how much we respect the feedback that we're hearing. I'm hearing so much concern about the implementation methods. I'm a mom of 4. That I got to that food section, and the first thing I thought was kids need to eat, though. I mean, I was with you on that, but I didn't ask any questions about any of those measures because my understanding was that that's not really what we're discussing right now. That's information, it's valuable information, it's strategies and tools that can be considered. But what we're talking about is just as a school district-wide, because our district is newly united and merged, but that district-wide, we create a standard that we can agree on. And this is just a step into that discussion to saying we agree we're gonna have this discussion. It's just agreeing that this is a policy that we can try to make. I don't want people to feel disrespected because we're willing to expand this conversation. And that's really what we're voting on right now is, can we agree to move this forward and see if we can find a medium that we can all agree on, and there will be debate and there will be conversation. And so that a policy is modeled after everyone's values that demonstrates, hopefully collective opinions. And it makes me sad because I feel so much defensiveness from everyone, and it's a separate issue on those topics. Those implementations, these are separate documents. It's not a mandate. It's not one document. We're not voting on approving those methods. We're just having a conversation about saying, is this a value that our district appreciates, and is this an intention that we want to cultivate and work on creating a standard to move forward? So thank you, everyone, for your thoughts.
Thank you. Emily?
I was just going to say 2 things. I definitely see page 2 and 3 as a statement on values that can then help to further guide the school district. Doesn't mean that wonderful stuff hasn't already been done, but there are probably areas where we could further align to, the few points that are on pages 2 or 3 once they've been revamped by the policy committee to be more embedded or at least aligned with other policies that we already have or not overlapping. and mirroring some of the stuff that probably has already been proposed throughout the state. So that was one thing. The second thing is, you know, I hear a lot of commentary on what is the role of the school boards. And it's so interesting because when I saw the task force proposal, just page 2 and 3, not the rest of it, it didn't seem, you know, beyond the call of duty. And when I looked back to I have it open right now, the WSESU SD ongoing social justice and anti-racist commitment that we made, a lot of what was in that, like we actually, you know, agreed that in each school we would evaluate curricula, books and materials, staffing complements, or staffing complement, hiring practices, policies and procedures. Like we did a lot that actually mandated people to do things in the district. And we thought that was okay. So it strikes me as there is a question of how things come about. And this is relevant to all committees. Like in the case of the task force came about from the community on the floor, and then we created the task force. And now they're creating kind of recommendations around what the community had suggested. Whereas the diversity, my understanding, and somebody from the diversity committee can speak if they'd like, but the social justice and anti-racist commitment came about really from the school district. And so I guess I wonder how things come up on a committee, because we did talk about this on the PBEC, like, is it our job to create new agenda items, you know, like, or do we have to have heard from somebody about this, and who do we have to have heard from, and who has been involved? So I guess it's just something as we grow and involve the school committees or the subcommittees, and it's getting off the topic of our motion, but it's a question to ask. And then, you know, I guess it makes me think of the defensiveness that I hear, which is valid. Is it because of how this topic came about? Thank you.
Thank you. Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say this is the most, I said it before, but I'll say it again. This is the most collaborative discussion that we've had, you know, involving staff, administration, school board members, members of the public. And I just think the value of that is huge. So I know that we have a motion on the floor, but because this is the first time that we've had this degree of collaboration, I would hope that we would not have a vote tonight, and we would actually have a redux of this same conversation again, because I think we need all of the parties that are here today to be involved with forming the policy. And then it would be collaborative, and collaborative things are so much better than non-collaborated dictates. So that's my feeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Deb Cardane.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. I want to just urge you to pay attention to the amount of staff who are here, who have stayed here, because they're interested in this topic, because they're devoted to this topic. And I urge you to listen to what they've said and the words that they've shared with you. I hope you don't see it as defensiveness. They need to be part of these conversations. And right now, the bandwidth is too low for them to attend a committee meeting. Thomas, I appreciate the work you guys have done, and I think it's amazing. But it's not the time to invite staff members to collaborate on this topic until we have our kids back in school. Thanks.
Eric Libertoni.
Yeah, thank you. I don't feel like teachers are really defensive about their curriculum right now. I feel like teachers really care about the students that come through the doors, and the population that we haven't heard from and that we have collaborated tonight, and I appreciate what Sean just said, is the 50% of our kids whose parents would know nothing about this meeting or this proposal, because as a teacher, the only way I knew about this was through other teachers. I have a daughter in kindergarten, and I think that our kids in our district, their parents don't know that this is really a topic, and there's no real avenue to know about that. And we're talking about kids who can't afford to pack their lunch. And I know lunch has been talked about a lot because that seems to be a pretty tangible thing. But it's really true. Like, those kids' families cannot afford to send them with what they want. And they rely on us at the school to take care of their kids. And for a lot of the kids, the school is the only safe place they have all day. And I think this is a lot bigger change than maybe it was thought when it was making the proposal. And the last thing I'd just like to point out, because I think a lot of people have said this, but maybe not so clearly, is that the first couple pages, which are the technical proposal, and the other pages in the end, which are supposedly recommendations, it feels very purposeful that they're not easily seen as two separate documents. I think a lot of people have alluded to that, but it feels very much like they're one and the same. So if the committee takes, or if the school board takes this to the policy committee and they decide to pass it, I feel like those recommendations go along with it instead of being a separate decision or conversation. Thank you.
Anne Plinkalaire.
I just wanted to respond to Emily's question about the Diversity Equity Committee proposal. And I think it's a great parallel to be made because there are policy implications that came from that proposal. I don't know the exact path that proposal took in order to become policy. But I do feel that if this were referred to the policy committee, I'm sure the policy committee would still get input from teachers and, as people were saying, all the stakeholders. But if it doesn't become policy, then it's just sort of this idea that isn't able to get turned into some sort of practical, tangible action, going back to what Thomas was talking about earlier. If the board was able to take action on that, which is another pressing current issue, I believe that it's within the board's purview to take action on some form of this proposal in the same way. And that came from the Diversity Equity Committee, which is teachers and administrators and superintendent and also community members in our WSESD Diversity Equity Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily?
I actually have a question for Sean, and he's next up anyways, so maybe he could answer it. Sean, I just didn't know, I didn't really understand, what were you proposing? Were you saying like maybe the best step instead of it going to policy committee was to go back to the task force and then do some collaborative conversation? I just wanted a little more clarity on, because I mean, it's an option, right? If it didn't pass. And I guess my second question to you is, if you don't mind answering, what would be the danger of it going to the policy committee and having some type of collaborative process there? Like, what do you see as the downfall of that compared to, and want to shift it back to the task force? Thank you.
Can I respond, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Okay.
Please.
What I think is happening tonight is the first time that all of the staff, the administration, the public are aware of what's going on. And so therefore, I think that we should have a replay of this conversation again at the school board level to try to figure out very specifically what we want to do going to the policy committee. I think the value of what has been said tonight cannot be underestimated. And I would also have a question and a comment, and that was the discussion of the anti-racist commitment. It was not a policy. It is not a policy manual document that is now in our policy manual. It was just a resolution. Actually, I made the recommendation that it would be made a policy, because policies are much more durable than a resolution or a statement by a board. So I think this proposal is important enough that it would warrant a re-examination, just like we're having right now, at a later date, and then go forward from that rather than voting tonight on it. So that's my feeling. Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts directly to the motion, which is to refer the WSESD Climate Crisis Policy Proposal to the Policy and Amendment Committee to develop a policy for the board? Seeing none, we're gonna do this by roll call so we don't have to do it twice. And I just put the names down by town. There's no particular order. Michelle, last question.
Sorry, yeah,
It's okay.
I realized Emily put this motion, put out this motion. But I do hear Sean's point, and I do feel like at 9:43 that maybe the conversation's not over, and I don't want to rush something that needs to be, if it still needs to be discussed and it's late, and everyone needs to take a step back. And I just think that we should consider tabling this and with a set date for a future discussion. It feels like maybe there's too much to still talk about to make informed decisions and represent the people who voted for us to sit here fairly and represent their voice. I would love to talk to my leadership council and get more feedback. But that's just throwing it out there, Emily. I don't know if that's something that is anywhere in your mind, but I do think there's value to what Sean was just pointing out.
Yeah,
Michelle, the way that would happen is that you would make a motion to table. Someone would have to second that, and then we would vote on whether to table or not.
All right, can I make a motion to table this
Yeah.
motion
Is there-
until?
And I would second it, Kelly.
Okay, so we have motion to table. Michelle, seconded by Kelly. Discussion on the motion to table. Tim?
Again, to repeat, I think what Emily asked about, I don't see any reason at all why the collaboration that we've had tonight cannot continue if this motion goes to the policy committee. So I will vote against tabling it.
Other members of the board on the motion to table? Emily?
Oh, yeah, Kelly.
Tim, yeah, I mean, I hear that. I think it's just, the fact is it's very late. And additionally, I think what I'm hearing from the staff too, and the administration and everybody is like, it's maybe now is not the time, not that it's not, it's definitely the time to take on climate crisis, but if it goes to the policy and amendment committee, they're going to have some conversations, but the staff doesn't feel equipped at this moment to be talking about it because they're, they have obviously other priorities. So I guess the only thing I worry about is if it goes to policy and amendment now, will it garner the amount of people at that meeting as it would at a regular school board meeting? I don't think so at this moment. So I wish it could be tabled not indefinitely though. I wish there could be like a tabled to date because I always fear that this is just falling away.
Yeah, the table to date was to our next meeting.
Okay, I appreciate that.
It has to have a table to date. Liz?
I'm going to speak against Michelle's idea. I think that the Policy and Amendment Committee has a lot of research to do before it even begins to come up with a policy. I mean, there's all kinds of things to research aside from everything that you've told us. And I understand that you guys, you teachers, you're out straight, and here you are at 9:45 at night when you should be like chilling out, and you're here at this meeting. But I think that moving it to the Policy and Amendment Committee doesn't mean it's going into fast motion. It doesn't mean like, oh, it's going to be bam, 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 bam. I think we, need to look around, maybe around the country, around the state, look to the VSBA, and there's just a lot more to it than just, oh, we're taking Thomas's proposals and turning it into a policy. And I don't think people are understanding that. So I would vote against Michelle's motion. I think that getting a start on the very beginnings of a start is a good thing.
On the motion to table, Sean?
Yes,
you're
I
still
would
muted.
table the motion. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were doing a tally right now, David.
I'm not. You put your hand up. You had your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Emily?
I just want to do one correction is we keep calling it Thomas's proposal, but it's the task force proposal. Thomas is representing, but I don't want him to feel like the target of negative energy. So I'm just putting that out there that it was a collaborative, he's the face of it right this second. So.
Thomas?
Just want to say that 2 separate points. Like you said, I wrote part of this. The big task force that involves lots of people from different parts of the community wrote a lot of it as well. And since we've been writing it, Australia burned because of climate crisis. So that's how long this has been going on. Just to let you know, the longer we delay, things happen in all this time. The longer we wait, the more the effects.
Okay, just any other, we don't take public comment on a motion to adjourn. So any other board comments on the motion to adjourn, or the motion to table, sorry. So hearing none, I'll do the roll call. This is on a motion to table the motion to refer the proposal, the policy proposal to the Policy and Amendment Committee until our next regular meeting, which is November 4th. Anne, a yay or nay?
Yay.
Liz?
Nay.
Say that again, please.
Nay.
Thank you. Thomas?
Nay.
Michelle?
Sorry, yes. Yay.
Sean?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Jackie?
Nay.
Tim?
Nay.
Emily?
Yes.
And I'm going to vote yes, so that we can continue the dialogue. I think well, I don't get to explain my vote. So that makes it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor of tabling until the next meeting. We will have a clear agenda item, and we will take the usual steps, including the Communication Council, to advertise it so people can come. And we will separate the documents so it's really clear what we're talking about. I think even to the very end, people were still confusing what the question was. So we have voted to table it, so we don't have to, we won't be voting on the motion tonight. So that's it for that item. Mark Spino, you had your hand up for a long time. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm glad we are tabling this, but I just want to speak to we've talked about the importance of leadership councils and how important they are in our process of moving forward as a school district. And my leadership council certainly hasn't seen this document. The first time I saw it was on Friday. I don't believe many leadership councils had an opportunity to take a look at this before it was proposed to the school board for an adoption. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Sean, I'd really like to get us home, so if you could be brief, please.
I will. I would just like to comment that the Guilford Leadership Council did all received this document. I sent it to the Leadership Council
Okay,
and
good
to
for
our
you.
principal. So, and so it was definitely discussed at our meeting on the 4th.
Okay, so next item is new business, and that is to propose to create a board social justice study group to discuss possible action. And I do not recall where this proposal came from, but it came up and I said I would put it on an agenda. So I did, and then I wrote on my notes here that I would like to send this to the Social Justice Committee to discuss, since the Social Justice Committee is looking into ongoing training for the board and for administrators. And so I'd like to have that to see if this may be part of what is coming in those proposals, rather than for us to talk about that, especially at 7 minutes to 10. So unless people feel otherwise, I would like to forward that to the Social Justice Committee. I don't see any flags, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And last thing is public comment on non-agenda items. Are there any public comments on agenda items that were not on our agenda? We covered a lot. There wasn't much that didn't show up on the agenda. Seeing none, I believe our business is complete. Oh, Shannon Kelly. You'll have to unmute. Yep.
Sorry. Just one thing I wanted to bring up is bringing back kindergarten and first graders, in November. I'm just curious, given the outlook for COVID and it possibly increasing throughout the winter, like it's a huge ask to plan for having students back 4 days a week. And I just want to put it out there that if we're going to inevitably be going fully remote, if things increase in the winter, like I just don't know how many plans we can possibly have month by month. And so I just want to put it out there that we should give some real thought to that.
I can assure you that real thought and extensive thought by dozens and probably hundreds of people is going into that, including consulting with anybody that has any knowledge in the area. There's just no question about that. Thank you. Anne, would you take us out, please?
Sorry, trouble with my mute button. Mr. Chairman, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us and for the incredibly thoughtful efforts. And all the staff and public that came to participate. This is a first for us.
Thanks, David.